Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain had started softly, almost as a whisper, when they first saw the lodge through the thickening mist. Its silhouette loomed in the distance, a dark figure against the gray sky, standing like an ancient sentinel in the heart of the forest. Tall trees, their branches twisted in strange, unnatural shapes, surrounded the building. Their leafless limbs swayed in the wind, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. Amelia tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she navigated the narrow, winding road that led deeper into the woods. The headlights of the car sliced through the thick fog, illuminating only a few feet ahead. Her heart beat a little faster as the road grew steeper, the trees pressing in on both sides. "Are we sure this is the right place?" she asked, glancing nervously at Luke, who was seated beside her. Luke, looking equally uncertain, checked the map on his phone. "It's the only lodge on this road. It's a little off the grid, remember? Just the kind of place we wanted to get away to." He reached for the radio dial, but the static in the air swallowed any attempt to play music, leaving only the sound of the rain and the occasional crackling thunder. Amelia didn't reply, but she felt a growing unease. The trees outside seemed to crowd in closer, their branches clawing at the windows. It felt as if the forest itself was alive, watching them, waiting. They finally arrived, the car crunching over the gravel as it pulled up to the lodge. The large, wooden structure looked both inviting and ominous, its windows dark and empty, save for the faint glow of a light on the porch. The place seemed deserted, as if no one had stepped foot there in years. Luke got out first, pulling a small bag from the back seat. "Let's get inside. It's freezing out here." Amelia hesitated, her eyes drawn to the woods that stretched endlessly behind the lodge. The rain had turned into a steady downpour now, soaking the ground, creating deep puddles that reflected the flickering porch light. The forest beyond seemed to murmur in the wind, a strange, almost mournful sound. They climbed the steps to the porch, where Luke knocked on the heavy wooden door. The sound echoed, far too loudly for a place that felt abandoned. They waited, but there was no answer. Amelia glanced over her shoulder, the rain now pouring in sheets, and shuddered. Something about the silence in the air felt wrong. "Maybe we should just," she started, but the door creaked open before she could finish her sentence. A tall man stood in the doorway, his face shadowed by the brim of a worn cap. His clothing was old-fashioned, like something from another time, but it didn't seem strange in this setting. The lodge itself felt timeless. "Welcome," the man said in a low, gravelly voice. "You must be the guest. Come in. It's not safe out there tonight." They stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind them with a heavy thud. The warmth of the lodge enveloped them like a blanket, but it didn't quite erase the chill of the forest that clung to their bones. The room smelled of pine and wood smoke, and a fire crackled in a large stone hearth. The man gestured to a pair of armchairs near the fire. "Get comfortable. I'll get your bags." As they settled into the chairs, Amelia could feel the tension leaving her shoulders, but a strange sense of foreboding crept in, like a shadow passing over the room. She glanced out the window, where the rain lashed against the glass, and the trees seemed to sway in time with the gusts of wind. "Something about this place. It feels different," she muttered to herself, though she didn't know exactly what she meant. Luke didn't seem to hear her, his attention focused on the fire. "I think it's perfect. Just the kind of place to disconnect, right?" But Amelia didn't feel as if they were disconnecting. It felt more like they were being drawn in deeper into something darker. The man returned with their bags and set them by the door. "I'm Jacob. I run this lodge," he said, his voice almost too quiet, as if he didn't want to disturb the silence of the storm outside. "Thanks," Luke said, taking the bags from him. "You don't get many guests out here, do you?" Jacob's eyes flickered briefly to the window, then back to them. "Not many. Not in the storms." The fire crackled loudly in the hearth, and the wind howled outside, but inside, everything felt still. Amelia felt as if the lodge itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Well," Jacob continued, his voice dropping even lower, "make yourselves at home. But I'd advise against venturing too far into the woods tonight. It's not the best weather for it." "Don't worry, we were planning on just relaxing by the fire," Luke said, his voice casual, though Amelia could feel a slight edge to it. Jacob nodded. "Good. You'll be safe here tonight. The storm won't pass until morning." With that, he turned and walked back to the door, leaving them alone in the lodge. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The storm outside was relentless, and she could swear she heard something in the distance. Just on the edge of hearing, a soft thudding sound like something large moving through the forest. She glanced at Luke, but he was already half asleep, his eyes heavy from the long drive. She turned her gaze back to the fire, but the flames now seemed to flicker unnaturally, casting shadows that danced and shifted. And just as she thought she might be imagining it, a soft tapping echoed against the window, followed by a low, guttural growl. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. The forest was waking up, and it was much closer than she had ever imagined. And then, just as quickly, the tapping stopped. Amelia's heart raced as she sat frozen, staring at the window, the sound of the tapping still echoing in her mind. The fire crackled loudly in the hearth, but its warmth did little to ease the chill creeping up her spine. She strained her ears, waiting for something, anything, that would explain the noise. But there was nothing. Luke, oblivious to her growing unease, was slouched in his chair, his eyes closed. His breath had deepened, his exhaustion from the drive finally catching up with him. But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight. She stood slowly, her eyes still fixed on the window. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, the sound of it drumming on the roof almost deafening. The trees outside were swaying violently, their branches thrashing against each other like twisted limbs. It felt as if the entire forest was alive, stirring, waiting for something to happen. She made her way to the window, her feet silent on the wooden floor. The glass was fogged, the mist outside so thick it seemed to blur everything. She wiped her sleeve across the window pane, trying to get a clearer view, but the darkness beyond was impenetrable. Only the faintest outline of the trees could be seen, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes by the wind. And in the distance, something shifted, just a flicker of movement between the trees. Amelia's breath caught in her throat, but before she could make sense of what she saw, the tapping came again. This time louder, more urgent. It wasn't on the window. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the forest, as if something was pounding the earth with enormous force. The growl followed, low and menacing, a sound that seemed to vibrate in her chest. It wasn't an animal, at least not any animal she knew. The noise was deep, primal, and unsettling. Amelia's legs trembled as she stepped back from the window, her pulse racing. Luke stirred in his chair, his eyes flicking open. "What's going on?" he mumbled groggily, rubbing his face. She didn't know how to explain it. "I thought I heard something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the woods. Like a growl." Luke pushed himself upright, his expression turning skeptical but concerned. "It's probably just an animal. Storming out there. Animals get restless during storms." He ran a hand through his hair and yawned. "Don't let it get to you. You've been driving for hours." But Amelia wasn't convinced. The noise hadn't sounded like any animal she had ever heard. It was too raw, too unnatural. And the way the forest seemed to come alive in the storm only heightened her discomfort. She glanced at the fire, which had started to dim as the logs burned lower, casting longer shadows across the room. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in, and the silence between the crackles of the fire seemed to stretch on forever. "I don't think we should go to sleep just yet," Amelia said, her voice tinged with unease. "I feel like something's watching us." Luke frowned but didn't argue. He stood, stretching his arms, and wandered toward the small kitchen area. "You want something to drink? Tea maybe? We could just relax until the storm calms down." "Yeah, sure." Amelia tried to calm herself, but the sense of dread gnawing at her insides refused to let go. She took a few slow steps back toward the window, this time keeping her distance from the glass, as though it were an invisible barrier that might draw something closer. She had never been the type to be easily frightened, but this place, this forest, felt wrong. The tapping, the growl, the unnatural stillness, all of it weighed on her mind. Luke's footsteps echoed as he rummaged around the kitchen, searching for the kettle. Amelia's eyes never left the window, her mind racing. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind picking up and sending gusts of rain crashing against the walls. The trees swayed violently, and the shadows outside seemed to deepen, as if they were creeping in toward the lodge. A flicker of movement caught her eye. She froze, her heart pounding. For a brief moment, just beyond the trees, she thought she saw something. No, someone, moving through the rain-soaked woods. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, dressed in tattered clothes, moving with an unnatural grace. The figure was surrounded by mist, its face obscured in shadow. Amelia's breath hitched in her throat. She blinked rapidly, but when she looked again, the figure was gone. The trees swayed wildly in the wind, their branches almost bending to the ground, but there was no sign of movement now. Her hands trembled as she pressed her palms against the window, peering into the darkness. Had she imagined it? No, She was certain she had seen something. Amelia? She spun around at the sound of Luke's voice. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a steaming mug of tea in his hand, his brow furrowed. You okay? I thought I saw someone out there, she said, her voice shaking. In the woods. A figure. Luke's face softened with concern, but there was a trace of skepticism in his eyes. It's just the storm, Amelia. The wind's playing tricks on you. You need to relax. But Amelia could no longer shake the feeling that they weren't alone in the lodge. The air was thick with something ancient, something dark, that seemed to press in on them from all sides. The forest outside was restless, and she could feel its presence, its eyes watching them from the shadows. A loud, unmistakable thud echoed from deep in the woods, and Amelia's heart stopped. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. Something was coming. And it wasn't alone. The thud reverberated through the lodge, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the old building. It was unmistakable. A heavy, deliberate noise, too close, too purposeful. Amelia's heart skipped, her breath catching in her throat. She turned to Luke, who was still holding the mug of tea, his expression now a mixture of confusion and concern. Did you hear that? Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Luke's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he listened. The wind howled outside, drowning out most of the other sounds, but the thud had been loud enough to cut through the storm. It was unmistakable. Something had struck the earth, heavy and powerful, not far from the lodge. I don't know, Luke started, his voice tense. It sounded like something hitting the ground. Maybe a tree branch fell? Amelia shook her head. No, this wasn't the sound of a branch falling. It was too purposeful, too deliberate. She took a few slow steps toward the door, her hand gripping the back of the armchair for support. The storm outside roared, the rain battering against the windows, but the forest, in all its vastness, was silent now. Too silent. It wasn't a branch, Amelia said, her voice low but firm. It came from the woods, from the direction of the trees. Luke set the mug down on the table and joined her by the door. He peered out into the rain, his brow furrowed. For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, listening to the storm and the ominous stillness beyond. The trees, their dark silhouettes just visible in the downpour, seemed to sway in an unnatural rhythm, as if they were moving with intent, drawing closer. The faintest sound of scraping drifted through the walls of the lodge, as if something was dragging itself through the mud, moving toward them. Amelia, this place is isolated, Luke said, his voice wavering slightly. Maybe there's something natural going on. An animal, a bear, or... A sudden, deep growl cut him off. It wasn't the sound of an animal, at least not any animal they knew. It was low, guttural, and echoed from the depths of the forest, deep enough to be felt in their bones. The growl was followed by a distant screech, like the sound of something ancient and hungry ripping through the night. Amelia felt a chill sweep down her spine. She didn't need to look at Luke to know he felt it too. The sudden shift in the air, the tension that had descended over them like a heavy, suffocating fog. We need to go, Amelia whispered urgently, her voice trembling despite her attempts to stay calm. We can't stay here. Luke looked at her, his face pale. But the storm. I don't care about the storm, she cut him off. I don't care about anything. We have to leave. Right now. But Luke hesitated, his gaze flickering nervously toward the window. I don't know, Amelia. This could just be nerves. We've been driving all day, the storm's messing with us. Another thud, louder this time. Closer. The entire lodge seemed to vibrate with the force of it. The walls groaned as if something heavy was pressing against them, and the floor beneath their feet seemed to tremble. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. She grabbed Luke by the arm, pulling him toward the door. Now look, we leave now. But as she reached for the doorknob, a deafening crash sounded from the woods. A tree, huge, ancient, and twisted, fell with a thunderous roar, its massive trunk splintering as it hit the ground. The sound echoed through the night, the air thick with the violent rustle of leaves and the creaking of other trees bending under the force. And then, from the edge of the forest, came a series of footsteps. Slow, heavy, and deliberate, the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, moving through the rain-soaked underbrush, heading straight for the lodge. Luke's eyes widened in terror. What the hell is that? Amelia didn't answer. She pressed her back against the door, her mind racing. Her gaze flickered toward the fireplace, where the last embers were glowing faintly in the hearth. She felt trapped, her every instinct screaming at her to run. The footsteps grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of labored breathing, inhales and exhales so deep, so unnatural, They seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the realm of the human. "Get the bags," Amelia hissed, her voice shaking as she reached for the latch to the door. What?" Luke stammered, but she didn't wait for him to respond. She spun around and grabbed a small bag near the couch, shoving a flashlight and a few essentials inside. Her pulse was racing, her mind clouded by panic, but every part of her screamed that they needed to leave. No. Suddenly, the door handle rattled violently. Amelia froze. The breath in her chest caught. The rattling was followed by a sharp, scraping sound, like claws scraping against wood. The handle twisted again, and then a voice, deep and gravelly, like the sound of dirt being scraped over stone, growled from the other side. "You can't leave." The word sent a jolt of fear through Amelia's entire body. The voice wasn't human. It was something ancient, something that had lived in the forest for far longer than they ever could have imagined. Luke's face drained of color, and he backed away from the door. "Who the hell is that?" Amelia took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she had left. The door shook again, the wood creaking as something heavy pressed against it. She grabbed Luke's hand and pulled him toward the back window. "We're not staying here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have to go. Now." They stumbled toward the window, but before Amelia could open it, the scraping sound came again, closer now. A slow, agonizing drag of something large and heavy moving across the floor. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting, lengthening, as if something was crawling from the darkness itself. The thing outside wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as the scraping sound grew louder, almost deafening now. Her breath caught in her throat, and she dared not look at Luke, afraid of what she might see in his face. The shadows in the room twisted further, distorting the space around them, as if the very air was alive with something dark, something ancient. The floor beneath their feet seemed to hum with an unsettling energy, vibrating with the weight of something far beyond their understanding. "We need to get out," Amelia whispered urgently, pulling Luke toward the back window. Her hands were shaking as she fumbled with the latch, the metal cold and unyielding in her grip. But the noise outside, the scraping, the low growl, was intensifying, and the weight of the moment pressed down on her with the force of 1,000 storms. She finally managed to lift the window, but before she could push it open, a sudden, deafening crack split the air. The front door shuddered violently, and then, without warning, it exploded inward, the hinges torn from the frame as if they were nothing more than fragile twigs. Luke and Amelia stumbled backward, a gasp escaping both their lips. The doorway was now a gaping hole, dark and void of any light, as if the storm outside had invaded the very core of the lodge. And then, through that darkness, a figure appeared. It was massive, taller than any human, its form bent and twisted, like a grotesque shadow come to life. The figure had the shape of a man, but its limbs were too long, too spindly, its skin an unnatural shade of ashen gray. Its eyes glowed faintly yellow and unsettling, like the eyes of something that should not exist in this world. The figure's mouth opened, and a low growl rumbled from deep within its chest, the sound vibrating through the walls of the lodge, making the very air feel thick and suffocating. Amelia's breath hitched in her throat, and she grabbed Luke's arm tightly. "We're not safe here," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "We need to run." But Luke was frozen, his eyes wide, staring at the creature in the doorway. His face was pale, his lips trembling, but his feet were stuck to the floor as if he couldn't tear himself away from the monstrosity before them. The creature's eyes flickered, its gaze shifting between Amelia and Luke, as if it were calculating something, weighing them. Then, without warning, it stepped forward, the floor beneath it groaning in protest. The ground shook as its enormous, clawed feet touched the earth, leaving deep marks in the wood. "Run, Luke!" Amelia screamed, shaking him out of his stupor. She grabbed his arm and yanked him toward the back of the room, toward the window that now seemed like their only escape. The figure growled again, and this time, its voice came not from its mouth, but from the floor. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to speak, echoing the growl in a deep, guttural tone. The lodge itself was alive, resonating with an ancient power, and it didn't want them to leave. With a strength she didn't know she had, Amelia shoved Luke toward the window. "Now!" she cried. "Jump!" Luke's eyes were wide with fear, but he obeyed, clambering up onto the windowsill and out into the rain-soaked night. Amelia followed, her heart pounding in her chest as the rain battered her skin, the cold air slicing through her clothes. They landed hard on the muddy ground outside, slipping and stumbling as they scrambled away from the lodge. The rain fell in sheets, making the forest around them even more impenetrable, but Amelia didn't care. They couldn't stop. Not now. Behind them, the lodge groaned, the walls creaking as if they were alive, shifting in the storm. The creature in the doorway was no longer visible, but its presence lingered like a heavy fog, pressing down on them with an oppressive weight. "Amelia, where do we go?" Luke gasped, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. He looked around wildly as if the forest itself might swallow them whole. Amelia's mind raced, her thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind. She glanced toward the trees, their dark branches reaching out like skeletal hands, but something caught her eye in the distance. An old, rotting cabin barely visible through the sheets of rain. "There!" she shouted, pointing toward the cabin. "We head for the cabin. It's our only chance." They ran, their feet slipping in the mud, the sound of the storm swallowing everything around them. But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them, that someone, was following them just out of sight, lurking in the rain. The cabin seemed miles away, and the closer they got, the more the trees seemed to close in around them. The shadows in the forest grew darker, more oppressive, as if they were closing in on them with every step. The wind howled, and the rain became a torrent, blinding them to everything but the muddy path ahead. Then, just as they reached the door of the cabin, a loud snap echoed from the woods behind them. A twig, or perhaps something far worse, breaking underfoot. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "Luke," she began, but the words died in her throat. Behind them, emerging from the trees, was the creature. It moved silently, its long limbs stretching impossibly far as it glided toward them. Its glowing eyes pierced the darkness, and the air around it seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. It was following them. Luke slammed his hand against the cabin door, desperately trying to open it, but it was stuck, frozen in place by years of neglect. The creature's growl rose in pitch, a bone-chilling sound that rattled Amelia to her core. "Open!" Luke shouted, his voice cracking. With a final, desperate push, Amelia shoved Luke aside and kicked the door open. It creaked in protest, but it gave way just enough for them to slip inside. They both tumbled into the cabin, breathless and panicked. The door slammed shut behind them, but Amelia knew it wouldn't hold for long. The thing outside was relentless. It would find a way in. And then, from somewhere deep within the cabin, came a soft sound, a whisper barely audible above the storm. It was a voice, one that didn't belong. It spoke one word: welcome. The moment the door slammed shut, a deep silence fell over the cabin. The wind howled outside, but within the walls, it was eerily still. Amelia's heart thudded painfully in her chest, the adrenaline coursing through her veins like fire. Luke's breath was shallow, his hands shaking as he pressed his back against the door, but his eyes were wide, searching the cabin for any sign of what might be lurking inside. The cabin was dark, save for the pale light filtering through the cracked windows. The walls were lined with rotting wood, the floor uneven, creaking under their feet with every movement. The air smelled musty, stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Dust hung thick in the corners, and old cobwebs clung to the rafters like forgotten memories. But it wasn't the cabin's disrepair that made Amelia's skin crawl, it was the feeling of being watched. The oppressive weight of something unseen, something waiting. Her eyes darted around the room, her breath catching as the silence stretched on, stretching like an invisible hand around her neck. She could feel Luke's gaze on her, but she didn't dare look at him. She was too focused on the shadows in the corners, the strange darkness that seemed to pool and move on its own, even though there was no wind inside to stir it. And then, just as her pulse began to settle, came the whisper. It was soft, so soft that for a moment she thought she might have imagined it, but then it came again, clearer this time. Welcome. The words dripped like poison, their resonance vibrating through the air. It was a voice, deep and guttural, but it wasn't human. It was more like an echo from the past, a sound that seemed to crawl up from the very bones of the earth itself. Amelia's blood ran cold, her throat tightening as she tried to speak, but the words caught in her chest. Luke, too, was frozen, his mouth slightly open as if he were about to say something, but he didn't. His gaze darted around the room, the same sense of dread crawling up his spine. The whisper came again, this time louder, but not from any particular direction. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as though the cabin itself was alive, speaking through the cracks in the timber. Welcome to my home. Amelia's breath quickened, panic clawing at her chest. She reached out and grabbed Luke's arm, pulling him toward the far corner of the room. She didn't know what she was expecting to find, but she knew they couldn't stay in the center of the cabin. Not with whatever was watching them from the shadows. What is that? Luke breathed, his voice barely a whisper. His hand trembled in hers as he glanced around the room, his eyes wide with terror. I don't know, Amelia said, her voice cracking. "But we have to get out of here. Now." She turned toward the back door, but her heart sank when she saw the same heavy shadows that filled the corners now creeping toward the entrance, thick and black, as though the darkness itself had a will of its own. Suddenly, there was a soft creaking sound, followed by the unmistakable thud of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Amelia whipped her head around to face the source of the noise, but there was nothing there. No figure, no shape. Only the thick shadows crawling toward them like a living thing. And then, again, the whisper. "It's too late to leave now." The word sent a chill through her, freezing her in place. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and the air around them seemed to grow heavier, thick with the presence of something malevolent, something ancient. "Luke," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Do you hear it? That voice." Luke nodded, his face pale as he nodded vigorously. "I hear it, but it's not coming from anyone here." He looked around, eyes wide with fear, as if searching for an escape. "Where is it coming from?" Before Amelia could respond, the air grew colder. A sudden, bone-chilling breeze swept through the cabin. Though the windows were closed, the door sealed tight. The shadows in the room deepened, stretching longer and farther across the floor, crawling like living tendrils of darkness. Then came another sound, a scraping. A low, eerie, dragging noise, like nails across stone, only louder this time, as though something large and heavy was slowly moving toward them. Amelia's eyes darted to the far wall, and there, emerging from the darkness, was a figure. It was impossible at first to make out, but as it came closer, the details became clearer. An immense, hunched shape, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Its body was black as coal, but its face was something else entirely. It had no eyes, no nose, no mouth, only a smooth, featureless surface. Yet it seemed to see them, as if its very presence held their gaze in a grip tighter than any physical restraint. The creature dragged itself across the floor, its movements slow and deliberate, its body scraping against the wood with a horrifying screech. Amelia's stomach twisted, while rising in her throat as the creature approached, its dark, featureless face mere inches from her own. She recoiled, instinctively pulling Luke away with her, but the shadows around them thickened, closing in, cutting off any escape. The walls of the cabin seemed to pulse with a terrible energy, the very ground beneath their feet trembling with the presence of the thing before them. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice whispered again, its tone no longer soft, but sharp, almost mocking. "Now you are mine." Amelia tried to scream, but the sound lodged itself in her throat, stifled by the thick, suffocating air. The creature's presence was overwhelming, a weight that pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, to think, to move. "Amelia," Luke whispered, his voice barely audible. "What do we do? What is that thing?" Amelia opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. The creature moved closer, its featureless face now so near that she could feel the heat radiating off it, a sickly warmth that burned her skin. A low rumble came from deep within its chest, vibrating the air around them, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the thing reached out, its long, spindly arms stretching toward her. Time seemed to slow. Amelia's heart thudded in her chest, her breath shallow and ragged. She could feel the thing's presence, its cold, empty gaze on her. Its fingers brushed her cheek, cold as ice, and she recoiled violently, but her body wouldn't obey. She was paralyzed, trapped in the creature's grip. The thing's fingers tightened around her arm, pulling her toward it with terrifying strength. Amelia's mind screamed, her heart pounding so loudly it almost drowned out the voice in her head, the words that seemed to echo from the depths of the cabin. "You cannot escape." Suddenly, Luke's voice cut through the suffocating silence, his fear turning into raw desperation. "Amelia." Before he could finish, the creature's other hand shot out and slammed into him, throwing him backward with the force of a hurricane. He crashed into the far wall, crumpling to the ground in a heap. The thing turned its attention back to Amelia, its fingers curling around her wrist, pulling her into its grasp. Its body seemed to pulse with a dark, unnatural rhythm, and the walls of the cabin groaned, as if the very structure of the house was coming alive, bending and shifting to the creature's will. She closed her eyes, her thoughts scattering, her body trembling under the weight of the creature's cold touch. "You should never have come to this place." And then, with the crushing weight of inevitability, the world went dark. Amelia's pulse hammered in her ears, each beat echoing through her body like a drum. She was trapped, her mind racing, her heart desperately clawing to break free from the suffocating grip of the creature. Its fingers tightened around her wrist, the coldness of its touch seeping into her skin, dragging her closer into the darkness that swirled around them. She could feel the weight of the cabin pressing down on her, the walls creaking as if the very house itself was alive, twisting with the malignant presence of whatever this thing was. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but the creature didn't speak. It didn't need to. The silence between them was deafening, a heavy blanket that suffocated her thoughts. Its gaze, if it could be called a gaze, felt like an endless abyss, an inescapable void that stared into her very soul. Then, as if in response to her panic, the creature shifted. Its long limbs elongated, pulling her forward with a grotesque, unnatural motion, the floor beneath them creaking with the weight of its presence. Amelia's body jerked in its grip, a sudden wave of fear flooding through her. The walls around her seemed to warp, the timber groaning as though the house itself was protesting the unnatural weight now inside. "Luke?" Amelia gasped, her voice hoarse, barely able to find the strength to speak. But there was no reply. She turned her head frantically, searching for any sign of him, but there was nothing, only the suffocating shadows that had swallowed the cabin whole. She felt a wave of cold, an icy chill creeping up her spine, as the creature dragged her toward the heart of the cabin. She wasn't sure what she expected, but it wasn't this. This was far beyond anything she could have imagined. The creature's movements were swift, precise, and as it pulled her forward, the cabin seemed to shift beneath her feet. The shadows on the walls flickered, stretching unnaturally toward the creature as though drawn to it. The air thickened, the smell of damp earth mixing with the faint scent of something ancient, something rotting, something alive. She could hear her own breath now, ragged and quick, as the creature took another step forward, its clawed feet leaving deep indentations in the wood. Her arm burned with pain as the creature's fingers tightened, pulling her closer to the center of the room, where the darkness seemed to gather in an impenetrable wall. Without warning, the floor beneath them shifted. The wood groaned, and then, with an ear-splitting crack, the ground buckled beneath her feet, the whole cabin seemingly splitting in two. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the immense force of the collapse. The ground beneath her gave way, and before she could register what was happening, she was falling. The world around her spun in a chaotic blur. The air rushed past her, thick with the smell of damp earth, as she plummeted into the unknown. Her stomach lurched violently, and her breath caught in her throat. She reached out, her hands grasping for anything to stop the fall, but there was nothing, only the black abyss below. Time seemed to stretch in that moment, the falling endless, until at last, with a sickening jolt, the ground beneath her body gave way and she slammed into something soft, mossy earth, damp and cold. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs and she gasped for air, trying to orient herself. Her head swam, her vision swimming in darkness, but the weight of the air, the overwhelming sense of heaviness, pressed down on her, and she knew she hadn't fallen alone. She tried to push herself to her feet, but the darkness around her was absolute. It was like being submerged underwater, the sounds muffled, the world moving in slow motion. As she struggled, the faintest whisper reached her ears, an echo of the voice from earlier, twisted and deeper now, like a nightmare that had been brought to life. "You belong here." Amelia's heart stopped. The voice, cold and malevolent, reverberated through the air. It was everywhere, inside her head, in the very bones of the earth beneath her. She forced herself to rise, every movement slow and shaky as she tried to orient herself in the inky blackness. Her hands brushed against the cold ground, but it wasn't just dirt. It felt slick, almost like skin, warm and wet. The realization hit her in a wave of terror. The floor wasn't made of earth or stone. It was alive. Something moved beneath her. She froze, holding her breath. The sound of something scraping through the ground echoed around her, followed by the unmistakable rustle of movement. Something large, something heavy, moving just out of sight in the pitch-black dark. She could feel it, feel the presence of something ancient, something that had been waiting here far longer than anyone should know. The air shifted again and she turned, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness. But there was no escape, no light to guide her. Only the suffocating weight of the air, pressing down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, a faint light flickered in the distance. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She squinted, her eyes desperately trying to focus on the source of the light. It was dim, weak, but it was there. She staggered toward it, her legs trembling beneath her, her breath coming faster now as she moved, guided by the faint glimmer in the darkness. Each step she took was met with resistance, the ground seeming to suck her down with every movement. The light grew brighter the closer she got, and she could feel the heat from it, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold, damp earth around her. As she neared the light, it began to take form. She was standing in what appeared to be a cavern, vast, stretching endlessly in all directions. The walls were slick with moisture, the air thick with a strange, pungent scent that burned her nostrils. In the center of the cavern was a strange, pulsing glow, the source of the light. It came from an enormous stone altar, carved with intricate symbols and shapes, symbols that seemed to move, shifting and twisting as though alive. The light wasn't a flame, it was something more, something alive. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She took a step closer, drawn toward the altar, toward the glow that seemed to beckon her forward. Her hands reached out, almost against her will, as the air around her grew thick, heavy with an ancient power. And then, from the darkness, she heard the sound again, a scraping. The same low, guttural noise she had heard before. The sound of something dragging itself across the earth. Amelia froze, her blood running cold. She turned slowly, her heart racing, her entire body trembling. The shadows in the cavern seemed to move, shifting with purpose, forming shapes in the darkness. And from those shadows emerged the creature, the same one from the cabin, its limbs stretching, its body twisting in unnatural angles. It wasn't just following her, it was leading her here. The creature stepped forward, its long fingers outstretched, the pulsing light reflecting off its featureless face. It moved with deliberate grace, like a predator closing in on its prey. Amelia's breath hitched, her mind racing for a way out, but the way behind her was blocked now. The cavern stretched endlessly in every direction, and the creature was closing in. She backed away, her feet slipping in the wet ground, but the creature's voice filled the air again, sharp and unmistakable. "You cannot leave." The sound was deafening, reverberating through the walls of the cavern, bouncing off the stone until it felt like the entire world was closing in around her. Amelia stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The light from the altar flickered, and she realized with a horrifying certainty that the light wasn't meant to guide her. It was meant to trap her. And the creature? It was the keeper of the dark, and it had been waiting for her all along. The cavern's air was thick with a dense fog that made it hard to breathe. It clung to Amelia's skin, damp and suffocating, as if the very atmosphere itself had turned against her. The glow from the stone altar pulsed in time with her racing heartbeat, its light growing brighter and darker in rhythmic intervals. She could feel it in her bones, a pull, a draw, an ancient force that seemed to call to her from the very core of the earth. The creature, the thing that had followed her from the lodge, was moving closer, its elongated limbs gliding silently over the slick stone floor. Its eyes, those sickly yellow orbs, glowed faintly in the darkness, watching her with a terrifying calmness, as if it knew her every move before she made it. It didn't speak, but its presence was more than enough to fill the cavern with a suffocating tension. Amelia's mind raced. She had no plan, no way to fight it, no way to escape. Her breath quickened as the creature drew nearer, its long fingers dragging across the floor, creating a sound like nails against a chalkboard, sharp and grating. The shadows around it seemed to deepen, growing longer and more distorted, swallowing the light around her. She looked around frantically, but the walls of the cavern were smooth, featureless, stretching endlessly in every direction. There were no doors, no exits, only the altar, the glowing light, and the creature. She felt the cold sting of panic rising in her chest as the creature's gaze locked onto hers, its hollow face unblinking, its presence overwhelming. "You should have never come here," the voice whispered, the same low, guttural growl from before reverberating through the cavern, making her feel as though the very walls were closing in on her. Amelia's hands trembled as she tried to steady herself, but the fear was paralyzing. Her eyes darted to the altar again. The pulsing light seemed to grow stronger with each passing second, its warmth spreading through the cavern, mixing with the cold, damp air. She felt as if the entire cavern was breathing, slow, deep breaths like the slow, steady exhale of something ancient. She stumbled backward, her legs unsteady beneath her, but the creature didn't stop. It was coming closer, its movements slow but deliberate, like a predator toying with its prey. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her pulse roaring in her ears. The light from the altar danced in her vision, flickering and shifting, casting strange, elongated shadows on the walls. The symbols carved into the altar were moving again, their twisting, writhing patterns seeming to shift like living things, crawling with an unnatural energy that made her skin crawl. The creature's voice echoed again, deeper now, more insistent. "You cannot escape, Amelia. You belong here." Her stomach lurched, and she felt as if the ground beneath her feet was shifting again. The walls seemed to pulse in time with the creature's voice, the very air humming with its unnatural power. She could feel it in her chest now, a weight pressing down on her, an invisible hand that seemed to squeeze the breath out of her lungs. The altar before her glowed brighter, and for a fleeting moment she thought she saw something moving within the light. Something alive. A shape, a figure, a silhouette that seemed to rise from the altar's core. Her heart skipped a beat as she squinted, trying to make sense of the figure, but it was hard to focus. The air was thick, swirling around her like a whirlpool, blurring her vision. Then the creature spoke again, its voice low and resonant. "It is time. Time to embrace your destiny." Amelia's mind spun with confusion, panic, and disbelief. Destiny? What is this? What does it want from me? Her heart pounded louder, drowning out her thoughts. The creature was almost upon her now, its fingers reaching for her, its long claws glinting in the dim light. There was no way out, no escape. The darkness had closed in around her, and the only thing that remained was the creature and the pulsing altar. Amelia closed her eyes, her breath coming faster, her mind racing. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. The creature's touch was imminent, its fingers just inches from her skin, but before it could reach her, something happened. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the cavern, followed by the sound of stones grinding against each other. Amelia's eyes snapped open, and for a moment she thought she was imagining things. But no, there it was again. The altar was shifting, the stone groaning and cracking under some invisible pressure. The symbols carved into its surface had started to move, shifting and rotating, as if they were coming alive before her eyes. And then, with a sudden lurch, the altar split open. A burst of blinding light erupted from within, filling the entire cavern with a searing brightness that made Amelia flinch and raise her hands to shield her eyes. She heard the creature howl in agony, a shrill, inhuman scream that shook the very air. It recoiled, its body twisting in unnatural ways as if the light was burning it, pushing it back. Amelia staggered, disoriented by the explosion of light, but she didn't hesitate. She had no time to waste. She ran. Her legs moved without thinking, carrying her away from the altar, away from the creature. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The light behind her was blinding, filling her vision with a searing intensity, but it felt like a lifeline, like something good in a world that had twisted so completely out of shape. The ground beneath her feet shifted again, the air growing thick and suffocating. But now she felt something different. A pull. A tug. It was like the force of the altar's light was leading her, guiding her through the cavern. Her breath was ragged, her heart pounding in her chest as she pushed forward, her eyes searching for any way out. The cavern seemed endless, the walls stretching impossibly far into the darkness. But just as her strength began to fade, she saw it, an opening ahead, a faint sliver of light. She ran toward it with everything she had left, her feet slipping on the slick stone floor, her lungs burning as she sprinted toward the light. She could hear the creature behind her, its growls now distant, the force of the light pushing it back into the shadows. And then, with one final push, she leapt forward, out of the cavern and into the light. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world around her shifted. The cavern faded, the dark, oppressive atmosphere lifting, and she found herself standing in a dense forest, the light of the moon shining down through the trees. The air was fresh, cool, and crisp. Amelia collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Her body trembled from the shock of what had just happened, but she was free. She had made it. She was out. But as she lay there, her eyes darting around the forest, something told her that her escape hadn't come without cost. The creature hadn't been destroyed. It was still out there, somewhere, waiting. And Amelia knew that whatever dark force had claimed the lodge, whatever ancient power had ruled the cavern beneath it, would not be so easily defeated. The forest around her was silent now, save for the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, but she could feel it, its presence lingering in the shadows, waiting for the moment when it would come for her again. She wasn't free. Not yet. Not fully. But for now she was alive. And that was enough. Amelia lay in the underbrush, gasping for breath, her body trembling from the ordeal she had just survived. The moonlight filtered through the canopy above, casting fractured beams of pale light across the forest floor, but the peaceful scene felt out of place. Wrong, almost. There was a stillness in the air, an unsettling quiet, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, felt amplified in the silence, like it was waiting for something to break it. Her pulse was still racing, her thoughts scattered, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She could barely remember how she'd escaped. One moment she had been falling into the abyss, the next she was running from the light. But the image of the altar, of the creature's twisted form recoiling from its glow, was burned into her mind. And the voice, the one that had followed her since the lodge, the one that had claimed her, was still lingering in her ears. You cannot escape. You belong here. Her fingers trembled as she pressed them against the earth beneath her, trying to steady herself. The ground felt solid, real. The forest around her seemed alive, the trees stretching upward, their trunks gnarled and ancient, with twisted branches that reached out like skeletal hands. Yet despite the beauty of the forest, the thick carpet of moss underfoot, the scent of pine and damp earth in the air, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She slowly pushed herself to her feet, her muscles aching with exhaustion, her body still trembling from the shock of what had just transpired. Her heart was still in overdrive, and her head felt foggy as if she had just woken from a nightmare, but the nightmare hadn't ended. Was this still part of it? The silence around her was heavy, oppressive. She needed to move. She needed to get away from whatever that thing was, from whatever had pulled her into the depths of the earth. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, the trees closing in on her like a maze. The path forward was unclear, and the darkness behind her, the darkness from the cavern, the one that had reached out to claim her, seemed to pulse just beyond the trees, a silent, malevolent presence that hadn't let her go. Amelia took a cautious step forward, her feet crunching against the wet leaves beneath her. She looked around, searching for any sign of direction, any sign of escape. The moonlight seemed to flicker in and out of view, like it was being swallowed by something unseen. The trees, their trunks thick and twisted, looked like sentinels in the night, their branches blocking out the sky. As she moved deeper into the forest, the sounds around her seemed to shift. The usual sounds of a forest, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. It was as if the very forest itself had turned against her, holding its breath, waiting for something. A sudden rustling from behind her snapped her to attention. She whirled around, her heart racing again, her eyes scanning the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the trees, looming in the night, their shadows long and twisted, like they were watching her every move. It's just the wind, she told herself, trying to calm her racing mind. But the rational part of her knew better. The wind didn't sound like that. It didn't scrape the ground with that dragging, scratching noise. She took a few more steps, her eyes narrowing as she tried to pierce the dark forest. Then, just as she was about to turn back, maybe head back toward where she had fallen, back toward the path she thought she had crossed, a voice rang out. A low whisper, barely audible over the rustling of the trees. "Amelia." She froze. The voice was familiar. It was deep, guttural, and far too close. Too personal. But it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from within her, or maybe from the air itself, as if it were being whispered directly into her mind. You cannot outrun the forest. Her blood ran cold. Amelia stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror. She felt as though the very earth beneath her was shifting, pulling her in. The ground was no longer solid. It felt spongy, alive, as though it were shifting in rhythm with her heartbeat. You belong here, Amelia. The whisper was louder now, and something deep within the forest seemed to respond. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, sending a chill down her spine. But it wasn't just the wind. No, it was something else, something far darker. The shadows in the trees seemed to lengthen, to move, twisting and shifting like sentient beings. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she backed away, her eyes darting around. The very air felt alive, heavy with malevolent energy. She had to get away. She had to keep moving. But just as she turned, the forest seemed to change before her eyes. The trees that had seemed so distant now appeared to close in, their bark twisting into grotesque, skeletal faces. The branches stretched out toward her, like fingers reaching from the shadows, their gnarled limbs grabbing at the air. "Leave if you can." The voice echoed again, and this time it wasn't a whisper. It was loud. It was commanding. A growl, a rumble of something that wasn't human. The ground shook beneath her feet, and the trees seemed to sway in a slow, deliberate motion. The forest was moving. Amelia's pulse quickened as her legs carried her forward, but she had no sense of direction, no sense of how to get away. It was like the forest itself was a maze, shifting and twisting around her, making every step feel as though it took her deeper into its grasp. A sudden gust of wind pushed against her, knocking her off balance. She fell to the ground, her palms scraping against the rough earth. But as she looked up, her blood ran cold. In front of her stood a figure. A shadow, tall and imposing, outlined by the faint light of the moon. It was the creature. Its yellow eyes glowed in the dark, its twisted limbs impossibly long, its body a nightmare come to life. The face, if it could be called that, was smooth, featureless, except for the hollow sockets where eyes should have been. The voice that came from it wasn't one of words. It was a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the air, sending tremors through the earth. "You cannot leave, Amelia." It took a step forward, and the ground beneath her seemed to shudder in response. The creature's limbs stretched impossibly long, its fingers reaching toward her. She scrambled backward, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She had to get away. But the darkness was closing in around her. The creature was closing in. "You belong here." The ground beneath her feet seemed to collapse, as though the very earth itself had turned against her. The trees groaned, their trunks twisting and cracking. The forest was no longer a place of escape. It had become a prison. Her breath caught in her throat as the creature's hand reached out, its fingers curling around her, and then, silence. Amelia blinked, her surroundings flickering like a broken image in her mind. The creature's grip disappeared. The forest was gone. She stood in a new place. A strange, otherworldly place, bathed in an unsettling light that flickered and dimmed like a dying flame. The walls were made of something dark, stone, flesh. She couldn't tell. The air was thick with the stench of decay. She was no longer in the forest. She had crossed over, and something else had found her. It was waiting. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she stood in the strange, unnatural place. Her eyes darted around, but nothing seemed to make sense. The ground beneath her feet was soft, yielding, almost like something alive, breathing in time with her pulse. The air was thick and oppressive, carrying the weight of centuries of silence, of forgotten things. The very atmosphere seemed to hum with an ancient power, a presence that was both familiar and wholly alien, as though this space existed in a place outside of time and reality. The light in the air wasn't natural. It flickered and pulsed, not like a flame, but more like a shadow that couldn't decide if it was alive or dead. The walls were dark, dark stone? Or something else, something more fluid, like the very substance of this place was in a constant state of change. The shifting patterns on the walls seemed to writhe and pulse, distorting and melting before her eyes, forming shapes that made her skin crawl. "Where am I?" she thought, but her mind couldn't fully comprehend the question. There was something so wrong about this place that she couldn't even begin to process it. Everything about it felt out of place, like she had crossed some boundary, some veil between worlds, and now found herself in a place where the rules didn't apply. Behind her, the shadows flickered, and she spun around, her body tense, her senses screaming that she was no longer alone. The creature, the one from the forest, the one that had stalked her from the lodge, was there, standing motionless in the distance, its elongated limbs bent at impossible angles. Its featureless face, smooth and expressionless, glowed faintly in the sickly light, its empty gaze fixed on her. It didn't move, but its presence filled the room, pressing down on her chest, suffocating her thoughts. "You belong here," the voice whispered, though it was more of a hum than actual words. The vibrations of the sound seemed to reverberate through the very air, a deep rumbling that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Her heart raced, and she stumbled backward, her legs shaky beneath her. She needed to get away to escape this place, but where was she supposed to go? The air seemed to thicken around her with every step, like the space itself was folding in on her. The ground beneath her shifted once more, a ripple running through it like the surface of a pond disturbed by an unseen force. The walls seemed to groan, bending inward in a slow, agonizing rhythm, and Amelia could feel the pressure building, like the very space was closing in on her, trapping her in a nightmare of its own making. She spun, trying to make sense of her surroundings, but the strange architecture around her only grew more disorienting. The walls were now lined with shifting symbols, no longer mere carvings but living things, their shapes twisting and turning, forming words she couldn't understand, words that made her stomach turn when she looked at them too long. And then, from the center of the room, a low, guttural voice broke the silence. A voice like the growl of a deep, distant thunder. "You have crossed the threshold." Amelia froze, her body rigid, her breath shallow. The voice was different this time. It didn't come from the creature. It came from the very space itself, from the walls, from the ground. It was the place speaking to her, and it was aware of her. "You have entered the realm of the hallowed." The word hallowed sent a tremor through her. It felt like a name, like the title of something ancient, something forgotten, something old. She didn't understand it, but the weight of it settled on her chest like a stone. A new sound broke the silence, faint at first, then louder, growing in intensity. It was a rustling, a whispering, 1,000 voices murmuring in the darkness. She turned toward it, her pulse racing as the air seemed to grow heavier, thicker, as if the very fabric of reality was warping around her. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the space with 1,000 fragmented words, half-formed and broken, like echoes of something long past. Her skin crawled as the voices swirled around her, each one distinct, but all blending into a dissonant hum that filled her mind. It was as though the very air was speaking, telling stories from forgotten times, stories of things that should never be remembered. Amelia's head spun, and she tried to block out the noise, but it was impossible. The words wrapped around her mind, twisting and turning, forming a pattern that she couldn't escape. Suddenly the whisper stopped. Amelia blinked, disoriented, her breath catching in her throat. The silence that followed was suffocating. The creature moved again, its long limbs stretching, its body shifting in unnatural ways, crawling toward her with unsettling speed. The space around them seemed to warp, and the walls groaned as though the place itself were waking, stirring with dark energy. And then she saw it. A figure emerging from the shadows. Not the creature, this was something different. Something older. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its form draped in tattered, flowing robes that shimmered in the faint, flickering light. Its face was hidden, obscured beneath a hood, but the air around it seemed to pulse with power, a dark energy that made Amelia's blood run cold. The Keeper. The figure's voice came as a low, deep rasp, like a whisper from a grave, but its power was unmistakable. It filled the space with its presence, surrounding her, drowning her in the dark weight of its being. You have crossed into the Hallowed, where time does not flow as it should, where the boundaries between worlds are thin, fragile, easily broken. Amelia's mind reeled. The Hallowed? What was this place? How had she ended up here? The Keeper moved closer, its steps soundless, its robe trailing behind it like smoke. Amelia tried to back away, but the air grew thick, as if the very fabric of the space was pushing her toward the figure. It wasn't just a physical force, it was an unnatural force, something ancient, something that bent reality itself. You are here because you were called, the Keeper said, its voice now reverberating in the air around her. The creatures that roam the Hallowed wait for those like you. Those who are lost, those who have crossed into realms they were never meant to touch. And you, Amelia, have been chosen. Chosen? Amelia's voice was weak, trembling. She couldn't think clearly. The words didn't make sense. The Keeper's hand, clawed and long, reached out, its fingers outstretched, and the air around her seemed to freeze, every breath catching in her throat. Yes, chosen. You have been brought here for a purpose. You are the key to the Hallowed's awakening. She could feel it then, a shift, a subtle change in the air, as though something was changing in this space, something was waking, and it was linked to her. The ground beneath her seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the shadows in the walls began to twitch, to move, to live. No. Amelia whispered, shaking her head, unable to understand. I don't belong here. This isn't real. But the Keeper only tilted its head, its movements graceful, almost fluid, like it wasn't bound by the same laws of physics. Everything is real, Amelia. Everything you have witnessed, everything you have felt is real. But you have crossed into a place that exists outside of your world. You have been brought here for a reason. And the Hallowed does not let go once it has claimed you. A chill ran down her spine. Amelia's mind raced. She thought of the creature from the forest, the way it had followed her, how it had led her here. It had been waiting for her. She had been drawn into this place, a realm of ancient horrors and forgotten things. She was the key, the chosen one. But to what end? What do you want from me? She gasped, her voice breaking. The Keeper stepped closer, its form flickering as if it was shifting between worlds. Its face remained hidden, but its presence filled the space with an unbearable weight. Your time here is only just beginning, Amelia. The Hallowed is hungry, and you are its sustenance. Her heart stopped. And then, the ground beneath her feet cracked wide open, and Amelia screamed as she was pulled downward into the dark abyss, the very air around her shifting into something unspeakable. The Hallowed had claimed her. Amelia's scream echoed into the vast nothingness as the ground beneath her gave way, the cold, slick stone of the Hallowed pulling her into an abyss that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Her body jerked downward, faster and faster, as the very air around her thickened, constricting her chest, suffocating her in a way she had never felt before. The sensation of falling was agonizingly slow yet unrelenting, each second dragging her deeper into the unknown, into a place where the rules of the world she once knew no longer applied. She reached out desperately, her hands flailing, but the space around her was empty, devoid of anything solid to grab onto. Her fingers slipped through nothingness as though it were water, and her heartbeat thudded in her ears, the pulse of her life force trying to outpace the overwhelming pull of the darkness. Her mind screamed for clarity, but the abyss swallowed it all. The only sound in the vast, oppressive silence was the low, thunderous rumble that vibrated through her very bones. It felt like the earth itself was groaning under the weight of her fall, like some ancient, unseen force was alive within the depths of the hollowed, moving with purpose. And then, just as her vision began to blur, and the world around her seemed to twist into a sickening whirlpool, something changed. The fall stopped. Her body jerked, suspended in midair as if she had crashed into an invisible barrier. The air around her was thick, tangible, and alive. It hummed with a dark energy that clung to her skin like oil, slick and suffocating. Her chest heaved as she gasped for breath, but it felt as if the air was laced with something else, something foul, something unnatural. And then the whisper returned. "Welcome to the heart of the hollowed." The voice was different now, softer but somehow more insistent. It came not from the keeper but from the very air, from the very walls, from the deep, unreachable corners of the realm itself. It was as though the entire place was alive with voices, all murmuring in a language that Amelia could not comprehend, the words wrapping around her like a net, pulling her deeper into its strange grip. Her feet touched the ground. At first it felt solid, but as she slowly bent to place her hands on the surface beneath her, she realized that it wasn't stone or dirt, it was something else. The ground was soft, alive, pulsating with a rhythm that mirrored the beating of her own heart. She recoiled, pulling her hand away, but it was as though the ground had a life of its own, reaching up to grasp her, pulling at her fingers with a sickening slowness. And then, a flicker of movement in the corner of her vision. She spun, her breath catching in her throat. The space around her was dimly lit, the faint light filtering through a strange, fog-like mist that clung to the edges of the cavern. The walls were no longer walls at all. They were shifting shapes, moving like living things, their surfaces slick and dark, like veins pulsing with dark energy. The figure was there again. It was the keeper, but different. Its robes shimmered with a sickly light, the fabric rippling and distorting, as if made from shadows themselves. Its long, twisted limbs extended into the air, and its face, if it could be called that, was even more featureless now, a smooth, grayish void where a face should be, with cracks running across its surface like the fissures in a broken mirror. The keeper stepped forward, its feet gliding over the pulsing ground like it was floating, and Amelia felt the weight of its gaze, though it had no eyes, pressing into her, making her knees buckle. The air around her seemed to freeze, as if the very atmosphere was bending to its will. "You have entered the hollowed's core," the keeper's voice echoed, deep and resonant, vibrating through the air as though the very space were alive with its sound. "You are here to understand your true purpose, your fate." Amelia stumbled backward, her hands pressed against the air, but there was no escape. The space around her was closing in, the walls shifting toward her as though they were alive, closing the distance between her and the keeper. The air grew colder, the mist thickening, swirling in patterns that made her dizzy. She couldn't think. The weight of the place, the oppressive energy, was too much. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking as she tried to make sense of it all. "This can't be real." The keeper's head tilted, its form twisting unnaturally, its voice rising in a low, almost mocking hum. "This is as real as anything you've ever known," it responded. "This is the truth you were never meant to see. This is the beginning of the Hollowed's awakening, and you, Amelia, are at the heart of it." She shook her head, her pulse quickening as the realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. No, she had to be dreaming. She had to be. There was no way this could be real, no way the world she had known, the life she had, could be slipping away into this nightmare. The keeper took another step forward, its limbs stretching unnaturally long, and Amelia backed away instinctively, but she couldn't escape. She couldn't breathe. The air pressed against her chest, and her head swam. "You are the key," the keeper said, its voice almost tender, as if it were speaking to a child. "The hollowed cannot be freed without you. You are the one who will awaken it, the one who will lead it into the world once more." A shiver ran down Amelia's spine, her blood turning cold at the thought. She could feel the weight of its words, the gravity of the statement. She was the key. She had been brought here for a purpose. But what purpose? To awaken this? To bring this place into the world? She couldn't. No, she wouldn't. She wouldn't let it happen. She wouldn't become part of whatever darkness this was. But even as she thought that, something inside her flickered. A faint, growing warmth that began to stir within her chest, deep in the pit of her stomach. It was like the hollowed was calling to her, whispering its invitation, pulling at her very soul. The whispers from the walls, no longer mere echoes but voices, growing louder, urging her to listen, urging her to understand. The keeper's voice cut through the noise, smooth and cold, wrapping around her like chains. "Fight it if you must. Struggle against what is inevitable. But you will see, soon enough, there is no escaping this. You were chosen, Amelia. You are the chosen one. The Hollowed needs you. Amelia closed her eyes, squeezing them shut, trying to block out the sound, the voice, the overwhelming presence that filled her chest with dread. She tried to push back against the pull, the horrible pull of the Hollowed, but it was too strong. She could feel it inside her now, the darkness coiling within her veins, the whispers in her mind like a flood. Her fingers trembled at her sides, her breath shallow. The Keeper moved even closer, its fingers reaching for her, its long skeletal hand gliding through the air as if it were made of smoke. "You will understand soon," it repeated, its voice a low, steady hum. "And when you do, you will welcome the awakening." Amelia could feel it now, the cold, suffocating weight of the Hollowed settling over her like a shroud. The pull inside her grew stronger, the whispers louder, the shadows twisting and moving in the periphery of her vision. The walls of the Hollowed seemed to bend and stretch, their organic forms crawling closer, wrapping around her, until they almost seemed to breathe with her. And then, the ground beneath her feet gave way again, but this time it wasn't the familiar fall. This time, it was a descent into something deeper, darker. A place where time and space no longer held any meaning. The Hollowed was taking her. And soon, Amelia knew, it would have her completely. The air grew colder with each passing second, and Amelia's chest tightened as the Hollowed pressed in on her. The walls around her began to pulse, their movements slow and rhythmic, like the deep, steady breath of something vast, ancient, and alive. The sound of her own breathing, shallow and ragged, filled her ears, but beneath that, a low, rumbling hum echoed from every corner of the space. The Keeper's presence loomed, suffocating as it moved closer, its long, twisted limbs casting dark shadows that seemed to stretch across the floor like living creatures. "You can feel it, can't you?" The Keeper's voice whispered, deep and resonant, reverberating through the air. "The Hollowed calls to you. It is inside you now, waiting to awaken." Amelia staggered backward, her legs shaking beneath her, her eyes wide with terror. She tried to move, to escape, but every direction seemed the same. Every shadow twisted in ways that defied reason. Every step she took felt as though the very space around her was folding, shifting, twisting with her. "No, I won't let it." She tried to push the words out, but they were weak, desperate. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't allow the Hollowed to take her, to consume her. She didn't belong here. This wasn't her world. But the longer she stood in this place, the more she could feel the pull. It was a cold, silent force deep inside her, like a seed taking root, spreading, reaching its tendrils out through her veins. Her head swam, the air felt heavier with every breath, as though the weight of the Hollowed was pressing down on her, inside her. The whispers rose again, louder now, churning in the back of her mind, like 100 voices blending together in a chorus of madness. "Come closer." The words were like a command. Like the very space was calling to her, beckoning her. She could feel it, the pull, the draw, the undeniable force. The Hollowed wanted her. But even as she fought against it, something inside her broke. A spark of dark understanding flared in her chest, brief and fleeting, but there. "You are its chosen vessel." The Keeper's voice rumbled, now right beside her, close enough that she could feel its cold breath. "You have been drawn here for this purpose. You are the vessel for the Hollowed's return to the world above." Amelia gasped, her hands clutching at her chest, as if she could somehow stop the dark force from spreading through her. Return to the world above? The words hit her like a punch to the gut. The Hollowed, this place, had been sealed away for a reason. The idea of bringing it back into the world, into the realm of the living, filled her with a deep, unshakable horror. She stumbled back once more, but the Keeper's shadow loomed over her, swallowing her every move. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick and constricting, pushing her toward the center of the darkened space, where the ground was soft and undulating, alive with the pulse of something ancient. "You cannot resist it forever," the Keeper's voice whispered, now softer, almost soothing. "The Hollowed is a part of you now, Amelia. It has marked you. It will not let you go. Not until it is ready to be reborn." Amelia's head swam, her vision darkening around the edges, and for a brief moment she thought she might faint. But just as quickly she felt a sharp, searing pain in her chest, like a fire igniting beneath her ribs. Her hands shot to her side, but when she looked, there was nothing there. The pain was internal, burning, consuming, like the Hollowed was trying to rip its way out from within her. Her body convulsed as a strange, violent tremor racked her frame. She cried out, her throat raw, her body fighting against the internal force that was tearing her apart. The pain grew, the fire inside her expanding, spreading through her veins like wildfire. "This is your fate," the Keeper spoke again, its voice distant now, as though it were coming from far off, yet still resonating in her mind. "Embrace it and you will understand. Resist and you will suffer. The hallowed cannot be denied. It will consume everything, including you. Amelia's body shook uncontrollably and she collapsed to her knees, her hands gripping the pulsating ground beneath her. She could feel it now, the hallowed stirring within her like a beast awakening from a long slumber, stretching its limbs, opening its eyes to the world. The weight of it pressed down on her, filling her chest with an aching, unbearable heaviness. Her vision blurred, and in that blur she saw it. A figure, no, a presence, was standing in the distance. Far away at first, but growing closer with each passing second. It was enormous, a shifting mass of shadows and mist, but there were eyes in the darkness. Hundreds of eyes, flickering like faint stars, all staring at her with an intelligence that made her skin crawl. The hallowed is not just a place, the keeper continued, its voice now a mere echo, blending with the shadows that swirled around her. It is a consciousness. It has waited for you. For centuries, it has watched, and now you are its gateway. The figure in the distance loomed larger now, shifting and twisting with a slow, deliberate motion, like it was made of liquid darkness that had taken form. The eyes, those eyes, were endless, each one seeming to peer into her very soul, as though it knew her deepest fears, her darkest thoughts. No, Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. Her legs shook beneath her, her body battered and broken by the pain. She couldn't let it take her. She couldn't let the hallowed return. But the force inside her, that unrelenting, cold force, was growing stronger. The whispers swelled to a deafening roar, filling her head with 1,000 voices, all calling to her, all demanding her surrender. Join us, Amelia. Let us be reborn through you. She could feel her thoughts slipping away, slipping into the void with the voice, the growing presence of the hallowed. It was too much to fight, too much to resist. The creature, the keeper, had been right all along. The hallowed had chosen her. She was its vessel, its key. And now, as the figure in the distance came closer, she realized there was no escaping it. There was no way out. Her heart beat erratically in her chest, but it was fading. The strength was leaving her, the fight dying inside. She could feel the darkness growing, consuming her, filling every part of her, every thought, every breath. It was like drowning in shadows, sinking deeper into the abyss with every second. And then, just as she thought she would lose herself completely, she heard it. A sound, a faint whisper, so quiet it almost sounded like a dream, like a memory from long ago. Amelia. It was soft, familiar. Her name. Her real name. Wake up. Her heart stuttered in her chest. The voice, it wasn't the keeper. It was something else. Someone else. A voice she hadn't heard in so long, a voice from her past. Please, Amelia. Her mind, battered and broken, clung to the sound of that voice like a lifeline. The shadows around her began to ripple, tremble, as if they were uncertain, as if the very presence of this voice was forcing them to retreat. The ground beneath her shifted, almost imperceptibly, like it was losing its hold on her. Fight it, the voice whispered again. Fight it, Amelia. And for the first time since she had entered the hallowed, she felt the stirrings of hope. Something was pulling her back. Something, or someone, was calling her out of this nightmare. But could she escape the grasp of the hallowed? Could she break free from its suffocating hold before it consumed her completely? Her body screamed in agony as she forced herself to rise, her legs unsteady, her mind a haze of confusion and fear. But the figure, the presence, was closing in, its shape growing larger, more defined, its eyes burning with the knowledge that it was almost within reach. Wake up, Amelia. The voice whispered again, clearer now, more insistent. And with one final push, Amelia forced herself to move, to escape, to run. But the hallowed wouldn't let her go that easily. And neither would it ever forget her. Amelia's body trembled, her muscles aching with the effort it took to force herself to stand. The hallowed had become a part of her, and it felt as though the very marrow in her bones was being stretched and pulled by invisible tendrils, wrapping around her soul, binding her to this twisted realm. The weight of its presence pressed down on her chest, suffocating, like 1,000 eyes watching her every move, listening to every whispered thought. The shadows around her closed in, their edges sharp and jagged, pressing against her skin with a suffocating pressure. The voice that had called her, her voice, a distant echo, was still there, faint and fractured, like a thread breaking in the wind. It was distant, like something far away in the recesses of her mind, but it was real. You can escape this, it whispered again, a thread of hope threading through the madness. Amelia staggered forward, her legs unsteady beneath her, but the ground beneath her feet seemed to twist and bend, as though the very earth was alive, reacting to her every movement. The dark mist in the air coiled around her legs, pulling her back, but she fought against it, gritting her teeth and forcing herself forward. The darkness was closing in again, but this time there was something different about it, a weakness. It was hesitant, as if something was beginning to break through, to challenge it. The keeper, its tall form looming in the distance, watched her with its empty gaze, unmoving but radiating an almost palpable sense of hunger. Its shadow stretched out like a cloak, reaching for her, but it stopped just short, as though it too were held back by something invisible. "You cannot outrun it," the keeper's voice rumbled from the depths of her mind, a dark growl that seemed to rise from the walls themselves. "The Hallowed is within you. You cannot escape what you are." Amelia shook her head, trying to block out its voice, trying to push through the unbearable pressure building inside her chest. The Hallowed had marked her, yes, but there was still something. Someone outside of this place, something she had once known that was fighting to pull her back from the edge of oblivion. "You belong here," the keeper continued, its voice reverberating through the darkness. "This is your home now, Amelia. You will serve the Hallowed, or it will consume you. You cannot fight it. You cannot resist." Amelia's vision blurred, but she clung to that thread of hope, the whisper of the voice, her voice that was growing stronger again. It was like a lifeline, pulling her out of the depths of the Hallowed's grip, pulling her back to something real, something human. "You have to wake up." The air around her crackled with energy, a pressure so intense that it felt like the very fabric of the world was about to tear apart. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, and this time the darkness shifted. It wasn't solid, it was fluid, flowing and flowing, like it was being sucked into something deeper, something else. The walls of the Hallowed trembled, as if something was trying to break free. "This is your last chance," the keeper's voice hissed, now a low, menacing whisper. "Embrace the Hallowed. Let it consume you. Become one with it, and you will understand what it truly means to belong." But Amelia didn't have time for its lies. The voice inside her head, her voice, was louder now, clearer. It was no longer distant. It was right next to her, urging her forward. "You are more than this. You are stronger than this darkness." Her heart pounded in her chest, a heavy drumbeat that seemed to sync with the pulsing of the Hallowed's dark energy. She felt it inside her, spreading like a cold fire, eating away at her, trying to tear her apart from the inside. But as the voice grew louder, it carried with it something more powerful, something familiar. It was her strength, her will to survive. The ground beneath her cracked, a deep fissure splitting open, and a burst of light, pure and blinding, erupted from the split, forcing back the darkness just for a moment. The keeper recoiled, the light seeming to burn it, but it was only temporary. "You cannot fight it forever, Amelia. You are already ours." Amelia didn't respond. She couldn't. The weight of the Hallowed was suffocating, the pressure building inside her chest, but she fought against it with everything she had left. She could feel the Hallowed inside her, its hunger, its need to consume everything, to bring darkness into the world above. And then, just as the light began to fade, as if the Hallowed were reclaiming its hold on her, something shifted. A presence, warm, solid, pressed into her mind, the familiar sense of home, of a life she had once known. The figure appeared again, but this time it wasn't a mere whisper. It was there, standing before her, solid and real. The man's figure was shrouded in mist, but his outline was unmistakable. Jacob. Her heart skipped a beat. He was the one who had called her, the one who had been trying to reach her, to pull her out of the Hallowed. But how? How was he here? How was he a part of this nightmare? He reached out to her, his hand stretching through the mist, his features calm but desperate. His eyes were full of the same warmth, the same love that had always been there. His voice, soft and steady, broke through the din of the Hallowed. "Amelia, it's not too late. You can break free. You can come back to me." Amelia's throat tightened, her heart aching. Jacob. He had always been the anchor in her life, the one thing that had kept her grounded, kept her sane even in the darkest times. And now here he was pulling her back. "Oh," she whispered, her voice hoarse. The Hallowed's grip on her was almost unbearable. "How can I escape this?" Jacob's eyes softened, and though he didn't say anything, his hand moved forward, stretching through the mist, reaching for her. She could almost feel the warmth of his touch. "You've always had the strength, Amelia. You just have to believe in it." The air around her seemed to pulse again, and this time, it wasn't the oppressive pressure of the Hallowed. It was lighter, cleaner, like a new force was coming into the room, her force. The power of the human will, the human spirit, breaking through the darkness. Amelia's body shuddered as the light grew stronger, and she realized what she had to do. "You're not real," she whispered, her voice steady, stronger now. "You're just a part of this illusion." But even as the words left her mouth, she felt the strength in them. It wasn't the Hallowed speaking. It was her. It was the real Amelia, the one who had survived, the one who had fought to make it out of the lodge, out of the forest. She had come this far. She wasn't going to let it end here. The ground trembled beneath her feet as she took a step forward, and for the first time since she had fallen into the hollowed, she felt the chains inside her loosen. The pulse of dark energy that had been suffocating her began to falter, as though it were losing its hold on her, even as it fought desperately to hold her back. "Jacob, I'm coming back." Her words were louder now, more sure. She could feel the warmth of the light surrounding her, the pull of her own strength rising in her chest, pushing back against the darkness. The figure of Jacob dissolved into the mist, leaving only his voice behind. "You can do this, Amelia. I'll be waiting. I'll always be waiting." The shadows around her began to retreat, the walls of the hollowed shaking as if the very foundation of this place was crumbling. The darkness that had once been suffocating was now flickering, receding like smoke in the wind. Amelia took one more step, her breath steady, her heart still pounding. The light, her light, burned brighter now, a beacon that shattered the darkness in a final, violent burst. And for the first time since she had fallen into this nightmare, she felt herself break free. The ground beneath Amelia's feet began to tremble, the walls of the hollowed shaking violently as though they had been struck by an invisible force. The darkness, once thick and oppressive, was now flickering, trembling, bending, warping, like smoke being blown away by an unseen gust of wind. It was as if the very fabric of the hollowed was unraveling before her eyes, the veil between this world and the next thinning, shattering, and crumbling. Her heart pounded in her chest as the light, her light, pulsed brighter. Each beat of her heart sent waves of warmth through her body, a feeling of strength that surged with every passing moment. The weight that had pressed down on her for so long, the crushing darkness, the unrelenting pressure of the hollowed, was receding, retreating into the corners of her mind. She could feel it, the pull of reality, the pull of the world she had once known, calling to her. The whispers were dying now, no longer the chorus of voices but a dying hum in the distance. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, the words firm and steady, echoing in the silence that had begun to fill the space. "I can do this." The energy around her was shifting, the force that had once held her captive now twisting, buckling under the power of her will. The hollowed was fighting back, trying to reclaim her, but it was too late. The force of the light inside her had grown stronger than its grasp. The pulse of energy that had once been suffocating her was now part of her, woven into her very being, but it was no longer her enemy. She controlled it now. It was her power, her will. And the keeper, the creature that had loomed over her like a nightmare, a shadow that could never be outrun, was crumbling too. Its form flickered in the distance, like a broken specter caught in a gust of wind. Its elongated limbs twisted and shriveled, collapsing into themselves like smoke dissipating in the air. No. The keeper's voice, so deep and resonant, now trembled with desperation, the sound barely a whisper. "You cannot escape." But Amelia could feel it. Its power was slipping away, being torn from her, from the hollowed. The force that had once held her here was losing its grip. The keeper's hollow gaze, those empty, endless eyes, flickered for a moment, then vanished into the ether, consumed by the unraveling of the realm. Amelia took a breath, feeling the space around her shift. The fog that had surrounded her, the strange mist that had once felt so suffocating, was lifting. For the first time she could breathe freely, deep, full breaths that filled her chest with clean, clear air. She could taste it, fresh, alive, real. The world of the hollowed, the nightmare, the twisted realm that had threatened to consume her, was fading away. But even as the darkness receded, something else stirred within her. A feeling, a presence, that was both comforting and terrifying at once. It wasn't the keeper, nor the creatures of the hollowed, but something deeper, more ancient, something tied to the very fabric of this place. "You are not free yet." The voice echoed through her mind like a final warning, distant but still present. The hollowed had been a prison, a cage. But it had been more than that. It had been a place of ancient power, a space that existed beyond the boundaries of time and space, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. Amelia's hand instinctively reached out, the pulse of the light still growing within her. She felt it surge in her chest, a radiant energy that threatened to tear her apart, yet also shielded her. The presence, whatever it was still there, lingering in the edges of her mind, watching her. But she wouldn't let it take her again. She wouldn't let herself be trapped. The air around her shimmered, flickering like a flame in the wind, as though the very space she stood in was stretching, bending, shifting. It wasn't the hollowed anymore. No, this was something else. Something real. Her eyes snapped open, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she saw the sky. The true sky, the sky of her world. It was a dull, overcast gray, clouds hanging low in the sky like a heavy quilt. The trees stretched above her, their branches bending in the wind, the leaves rustling softly in the breeze. She was back. But something was different. Everything was different. She could feel the change within herself, a deep, aching shift in her core. The Hallowed had not just been a place. It had been a test, a crucible, a trial that had forged something new within her. And yet, as she stood beneath the trees, her legs shaky but firm, she could feel something watching her. Something lingering in the air, as though the Hallowed had left its mark on this world too, and not just on her. The wind rustled through the leaves, and Amelia glanced around, her senses heightened, as if the world had shifted into sharper focus. Every sound, every movement felt amplified. The crackling of the branches, the fluttering of the birds above her, even the faintest whisper in the breeze felt too clear, too alive. Her heart raced, her breath shallow as she took a step forward. But then she froze. There, on the edge of her vision, just beyond the trees, there was a figure. A shadow, darker than the shadows around it, standing motionless at the edge of the forest. Amelia's heart skipped a beat, the cold chill of recognition spreading through her like ice. It was the keeper. Or at least something like it. The figure was taller than a man, its body cloaked in a robe that shimmered like liquid darkness, and its face, if it could be called that, was a featureless, smooth mask, empty and watching. The air around it seemed to crackle, a faint, barely perceptible hum vibrating through the space. But this wasn't the Hallowed. This wasn't the place where it had come from. This was her world. Her world that was slowly but surely becoming infected by the power of the Hallowed. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching her, its presence more powerful than anything she had ever felt before. She knew what it wanted. It was waiting. Waiting for her to make the choice. You cannot escape us, Amelia. The voice was no longer in her mind. It was real. It was here, standing before her. The presence of the Hallowed, a shadow in her world, a consequence of her journey, a thread tying her to this nightmare. Amelia stepped forward, her breath steadying, her resolve hardening. She had fought the Hallowed. She had broken free of its grasp. But this was something new. Something darker. Something that had followed her back. She would not be its pawn. This time she was in control. I am not your vessel, she said, her voice steady, even though every part of her wanted to run, to hide from the terror that stood before her. The figure tilted its head, the smooth face unreadable, as if considering her words. It didn't speak, but it didn't need to. The silence between them was thick, heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had come before. Amelia took a deep breath, her pulse quickening as she met the gaze of the creature. No, the presence that had followed her back. The Hallowed was not done with her. But she was not done with it either. She was not the Hallowed's key anymore. She was her own. And she would not let this place, the Hallowed, take her again. Not now. Not ever. With that thought, she took one more step forward, determined to face whatever came next. She was done running. And the Hallowed would know that it had met its match. The figure remained motionless, its dark, robed form blending seamlessly with the shifting shadows of the forest, its presence as oppressive as the weight of the storm clouds above. The wind shifted, sending a cold breeze rustling through the trees, but it barely reached her. The air between them felt thick, charged with an energy that she could almost taste on her tongue, a tang of something ancient and malevolent. Amelia stood her ground, her chest rising and falling with each breath, her mind sharpening with clarity. She wasn't sure how she'd gotten here, how she had broken free of the Hallowed, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let the Hallowed consume her again. She wasn't going to be its puppet. The figure before her didn't flinch. It didn't move. But there was something in the way it stood, something in the stillness of its form, that made her skin prickle. It was waiting. Waiting for her to make the next move. You cannot outrun what is already inside you, the voice rasped, a chilling whisper that echoed through the wind, shaking the leaves around her. It wasn't the keeper's voice this time, though it felt similar. No, this was something darker, something more deeply entwined with the very essence of the Hallowed. Amelia clenched her fists, feeling the heat from the light inside her pulse with determination. She could feel the power of the Hallowed still, lingering just beneath her skin like an ache that wouldn't fully subside. But it wasn't her enemy anymore. It was part of her. And like the Hallowed itself, she had learned to twist it, to bend it to her will. You don't belong here. This is not your world. The words hit her like a physical blow, but she held her ground. No, she thought, gritting her teeth. I do belong here. I was brought here for a reason, and I will fight for my place in this world." Her voice rose from deep within her chest, cutting through the silence. "I am not your vessel. I am not your key. You may have touched me, but I will not let you control me. This world, my world, is mine to protect." The air crackled with tension, the trees groaning under the weight of some unseen force. The figure seemed to flicker, its dark form blurring for a moment as though the very essence of it was unraveling, but it quickly solidified again, looming before her like a monolith, unyielding, powerful. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the voice rasped, this time tinged with a note of something ancient and knowing, like a curse spoken from the depths of time. "The hallowed has already taken root. It is within you. It is you." Her stomach twisted with the weight of its words, but she refused to let the darkness take hold again. She wouldn't let it define her. She was more than what the hallowed had tried to make her. The storm inside her raged, but now it was not a force to fear, it was a power to wield. "I will fight it," she whispered, her voice steady, "and I will win." The figure's head tilted slightly, as if considering her resolve, its presence like a looming shadow at the edge of the forest. The space around them pulsed with an eerie, unnatural quiet. The wind had stilled, and the very earth beneath her feet seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something. For a long moment, nothing happened. The figure didn't move. The air felt frozen, as if time itself had slowed. Then, without warning, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. It was subtle at first, just a faint vibration, but it quickly intensified, the earth cracking open beneath her, sending waves of dark energy shooting up from the cracks. The sky above seemed to darken, the clouds swirling with unnatural speed, twisting into shapes that made her head spin. The hallowed had been sealed away for so long, but it wasn't gone. It was here, lingering beneath the surface, crawling through the cracks, whispering from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And now, it was reaching up from the depths, pulling at the very fabric of reality itself. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as the power surged through her once more. She could feel it, the hallowed's essence clawing at her, fighting for control, trying to break free, but this time she was ready. "You are a part of me," she whispered, her voice low and steady, her eyes fixed on the figure before her. "But you don't control me anymore. I will not let you take me." The air around her shimmered, and the ground beneath her feet cracked wider, the dark energy bursting forth in jagged tendrils that lashed toward her like the claws of some ancient beast. But Amelia wasn't afraid. She could feel it, she could feel the pull of the hallowed, yes, but now it was different. It wasn't a force that dominated her. It was a part of her. She had learned its language, its rhythm. She had learned to wield it. The light inside her flared brighter, surging up from deep within, a wave of energy that pushed against the darkness like a wave crashing against a cliffside. The ground beneath her feet shook harder now, and the sky above began to crack with thunder, lightning flashing across the clouds in jagged, violent streaks. The figure before her stretched out its long, spindly arm, its fingers reaching for her, but Amelia wasn't afraid. She extended her own hand, feeling the power surge through her as the light around her intensified. The energy of the hallowed, and the power she had claimed as her own, crashed together, a maelstrom of light and shadow clashing in the air. "You can't win, Amelia," the voice growled from the figure, but it sounded weaker now. It was as if the very force behind it was faltering. "I already have," she whispered, her voice steady and strong. The clash of light and shadow exploded in the air between them, a blinding flash that made her eyes water, and for a moment, everything was nothing. The world around her became a blur, a void. Time itself seemed to stretch and twist, pulling everything into a single point of concentrated pressure. And then it all shattered. The light burst out in every direction, pushing the shadows back like a flood of stars erupting into the night sky. The figure before her was thrown backward, its form dissipating into a swirl of smoke and mist, like a dream fading upon waking. The air hummed with energy, the earth groaning beneath her feet, but the force was receding. The darkness was retreating. Amelia stood alone in the clearing, her chest heaving with each breath. Her body ached, her skin tingling from the energy that had flowed through her. But she was still standing. She had survived. The forest around her seemed still, too still. The trees swayed in the wind, their branches creaking, but there was no sound. The birds had stopped singing, the rustling of the leaves had ceased. It was as if the world was waiting, holding its breath. And then, in the distance, she saw something, a flicker of movement at the edge of the trees. Her heart skipped a beat as she squinted into the shadows, but it was just a deer, stepping cautiously from the woods, its eyes wide and watchful. It paused for a moment, sensing her presence, and then bounded away into the forest, its form disappearing into the trees. The world around her seemed to breathe again, the silence lifting. But Amelia knew this was only the beginning. The Hollowed was not gone. It was still here in the world, in her. And wherever it went, it would find her again. But she would be ready. She was no longer its vessel. She was its enemy. And as long as she stood, as long as she fought, the Hollowed would never be free. She took a deep breath, the weight of the world pressing down on her again, but this time she wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. The Hollowed would never claim her. Not while she was still breathing. Amelia stood alone in the clearing, her breath slow and steady, the air thick with the aftermath of the battle she had just waged. The storm in the sky had not fully dissipated, and though the sky was still dark, there was a faint warmth to the air now, a sense of something shifting, like the world was slowly exhaling, releasing the tension it had held for so long. But even as the quiet began to settle, she knew that the Hollowed was far from gone. She looked down at her hands, her skin still humming with the energy that had surged through her moments ago. The force of it had been overwhelming, but she had done it. She had pushed it back. The Hollowed might have been a part of her now, but it didn't control her. She had learned to wield its power, and in doing so she had taken something from it. But that didn't mean the battle was over. She could still feel it. The tug at the back of her mind, the restless whisper of the Hollowed. Its influence was no longer an external force. It was part of her, deep within her, buried under layers of resistance. But it was there, waiting, watching, biding its time. She had won this round, but the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The winds that had stilled for a brief moment were picking up again, rustling through the trees with an almost unnatural urgency. The world felt off, like the balance had been shattered, and now, the pieces were shifting, realigning in ways that weren't meant to be. Amelia felt her heart pick up pace, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. There was something wrong, something in the air that made her skin crawl. The distant rustling of leaves became a steady rhythm, and then came a sound, a faint, almost imperceptible hum, vibrating through the ground beneath her feet. It was a pulse, rhythmic like the beating of a heart. A heart. Her heart. But it wasn't her heartbeat that was pulsing beneath her feet, it was the Hollowed's. Amelia looked around, her eyes scanning the shadowed edges of the clearing, her senses heightened, every muscle in her body tensed. There was no sign of the figure anymore, no shadow of the keeper lingering in the corners of her vision. But the hum persisted, growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from deeper within the forest, from the heart of the woods themselves, as if the Hollowed was bleeding through the very land, seeping into the earth. No, it can't be. Her feet moved before her mind could fully process the realization. She couldn't stay here. Not now. The Hollowed wasn't just in her, it had infected this world, twisted the very land itself into something wrong. She had to get out, had to find a way to stop it before it consumed everything. With each step she took, the hum grew louder, more powerful, until it vibrated in her chest, in her bones. The trees around her bent unnaturally, their branches twisting as though pulled by invisible strings, their gnarled limbs clawing at the sky, reaching for something unseen. The ground beneath her feet began to shift again, but this time, it was not just dark tendrils of energy that sprouted from the earth, it was roots. Massive, thick black roots that snaked out from the forest floor, wrapping around the trunks of the trees, pulsing with an eerie, unnatural light. The Hollowed was not just a force, it was becoming something more, something alive. And it was spreading. It was taking root, planting itself deep into the earth, feeding off the land, growing stronger. She couldn't stop herself. She had to go deeper, further into the forest, where the heart of the Hollowed lay, where it had begun, where it had festered. Her breath quickened as she pushed forward, her feet moving with a desperation that mirrored the pounding in her chest. The air felt heavier now, thick with an unnatural weight that pressed against her, like the very atmosphere was trying to hold her in place. Every step felt like an effort, the ground slick with moisture, her shoes sinking slightly with each movement. The trees, now twisted and gnarled, pressed in closer, their branches creating a canopy above her that blocked out the dim light of the sky. The world was becoming a maze, a labyrinth of shadow and dread. And then she saw it. A clearing just ahead, bathed in the dim, otherworldly glow of the Hollowed's essence. The ground was alive with movement, the earth rippling like the surface of a dark pond disturbed by unseen ripples. In the center of the clearing was an ancient, rotting stump, a massive thing, its surface cracked and split, as if it had been here for centuries, untouched by time or decay. The roots spread out from it, curling into the earth and stretching upward like the veins of some ancient, living creature. And in the center, pulsing softly, was a small, dim light. It flickered like a heartbeat, slow and steady, but it was alive. The heart of the hollowed. Amelia could feel the pulse in her chest, matching the rhythm of the light, the pulse of the earth itself. It was the source of it all. The hollowed had taken root here, and this, the stump, the roots, was its core, its source of power. If she could destroy this heart, perhaps, just perhaps, she could sever the hollowed's hold on this world. She didn't know how she could do it. She didn't know if she even could. But she had no other choice. The hollowed was already inside her, infecting the world around her. It was only a matter of time before it took over completely, and then there would be no hope left. Her hand reached out toward the pulsing light, her fingers trembling as the warmth of it radiated out to meet her touch. The air around her seemed to freeze, the forest falling deathly silent as the light flickered, then dimmed for a heartbeat, then flickered again, stronger this time. Her mind swam with possibilities, with thoughts of escape, of running, of leaving this cursed place behind. But deep inside, something else stirred, the hollowed's essence inside her, pushing her toward the heart, toward the light, urging her to take control of it. It was tempting. It promised power. It promised release. But at what cost? This is not you, Amelia thought, her voice sharp and clear in her mind. This is not who I am. She could feel the tug, the pull, the whisper of the hollowed urging her to become a part of it, to embrace it, to let it wash over her like a flood. She had felt it before, deep within the hollowed's maze, but this time it was different. She had the power now. She had control. And that was the key. Amelia's resolve hardened as she stepped closer to the stump, her body trembling but her mind clearer than ever. This wasn't just a battle against the hollowed, it was a battle for her very soul. She wouldn't let it take her. She would fight it until the end. Her hand closed around the heart, and she gasped as the energy surged up through her, a rush of power, of raw force that burned like fire in her veins. The hollowed screamed inside her mind, furious, but she held firm. She would not be its vessel. She would be its undoing. The moment Amelia's fingers made contact with the pulsing light at the center of the hollowed's heart, the world seemed to stop. Time itself held its breath, the atmosphere thick and charged, crackling with an unnatural energy. The pulse under her fingertips was like the beating of a monstrous heart, strong, relentless, and insistent, as if it was alive, aware of her presence. It was as if the world around her had drawn in a collective sigh, bracing for what was to come. Her heart pounded in sync with the light's rhythm, and for a brief moment she felt the hollowed inside her, felt its desire to consume, to bend her will to its own. The world around her darkened, the trees seeming to lean in closer, the roots beneath her feet quivering with anticipation. The ground seemed to breathe with her, alive with a pulse that was both ancient and terrifying. You cannot resist it, the voice of the hollowed whispered in her mind, cold and insidious, wrapping around her thoughts like a tight coil. It is a part of you. You belong to it. You always have. But Amelia stood firm. The power she felt surging through her was not just the hollowed's. It was hers. Her will. Her defiance. No, she thought fiercely, pushing the thought away. I will never belong to you. With a primal scream, she gripped the heart tighter, her fingers digging into its pulsing light, forcing her way into its depths. She could feel the energy flooding through her, hot and overwhelming, a torrent that clawed at her insides, desperate to take control. But Amelia didn't yield. She focused on the light, the heart of the hollowed, and she willed it to break. The pulse beneath her fingers began to stutter, as if it was faltering, and then, crack, a sharp, violent sound split the air, echoing through the forest like a thunderclap. The ground beneath her trembled, the roots around her churning as though they were alive, writhing, trying to pull her into the earth. The air grew thick with the oppressive weight of ancient power, suffocating in its intensity. But Amelia held her ground. The heart before her cracked again, the light dimming as if it were being slowly extinguished by her will. She could feel the hollowed's energy surging around her, desperate to reclaim its power, but it was too late. The heart was weakening, unraveling, and with every inch of her soul, Amelia pressed harder. I will not let you win. With a final, desperate burst of energy, Amelia tore her hand away from the heart, ripping it from the center of the stump. The world around her exploded in a blinding flash of light, a surge of pure energy that sent shockwaves through the forest. The roots recoiled, the trees shook violently, their limbs cracking and splintering as the hollowed's essence was torn from the very ground itself. Amelia fell back, the light in her hand pulsing and throbbing with a raw, untamed energy. It was the heart, the source of the hollowed's power, still alive but dimming, its pulse weak and fading as the last vestiges of the hollowed's influence were ripped away. But even as the heart's light waned, Amelia could feel the hollowed's presence shifting around her. It was not gone, not completely. It was still there, lingering at the edges of her mind, in the very air she breathed. The power of the Hallowed was too deep, too ancient to be destroyed in an instant. It was part of the world now, part of her, and it would always be there, waiting to rise again. But this was her victory. She had broken it. The heart of the Hallowed had shattered, its power fractured and splintering into the wind. She had torn it from its roots, and now it would be forever disconnected from the world it had tried to claim. Amelia rose slowly to her feet, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes blazing with the fire of her triumph. The clearing around her was still, the unnatural hum that had filled the air gone, replaced by an eerie, almost reverent silence. The darkness that had once consumed the forest was lifting, the shadows no longer pressing in around her, no longer suffocating her with their weight. The trees, though twisted and gnarled, no longer felt like sentinels of doom. They were just trees now, still alive, still breathing, but no longer part of the nightmare that had threatened to consume her. And yet, the victory tasted bittersweet. She could feel it, the Hallowed's essence still clinging to her, still whispering at the edges of her mind, like an echo that would never fade. It was there, always a part of her, but she was no longer its puppet. She was its destroyer. But even as the last of the heart's light faded in her hands, Amelia knew the battle was not over. It had just changed. The Hallowed was not just a force to be defeated. It was a part of this world, a piece of the very fabric of reality itself. Its influence would linger always, like a shadow waiting to reclaim what it had lost. And even though she had shattered the heart, there were others, other places, other hearts, other forces tied to the Hallowed that still held sway over the world. The Hallowed might have been defeated in this place, but it would always find new ways to emerge, and it would always be drawn to her. The realization settled over her like a weight. The Hallowed was still part of the world, still part of her, but it was also something she could never run from, only fight. With a deep, steadying breath, Amelia turned away from the broken heart in her hands. The roots of the Hallowed were still there, deep beneath the earth, and though the power of the heart had been broken, she knew that the Hallowed's presence would remain, always shifting, always watching. But now it was no longer a master over her. She had taken control. Amelia stepped forward, her mind clear, her path uncertain, but her resolve unshakable. She would go on. She would keep fighting. The Hallowed had tried to claim her, but she had torn its heart out. And for now that was enough. The forest around her seemed to breathe again, its pulse less frantic, its shadows less oppressive. The rain that had once poured endlessly from the sky had finally stopped, leaving behind only the soft sound of water dripping from the leaves, the quiet rustling of the trees. The world was scarred, changed, but it was alive. And so was she. Her journey wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Amelia allowed herself to believe that, just maybe, she could win. And maybe, just maybe, the Hallowed had finally met its match. Amelia's steps were slow but steady as she moved away from the clearing, the remains of the Hallowed's heart still burning faintly in her hand. The forest felt different now, quieter, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. The oppressive weight that had once clung to her every move had lifted, and the darkness that had seemed so inescapable was now a distant memory, receding like fog in the morning light. But there was still a sense of unfinishedness, a lingering pull, like the world was holding its breath, not yet exhaling fully. The Hallowed may have lost its grip on this place, but its influence had not been entirely severed. She could still feel it. It was in the way the wind moved, the way the trees swayed, as though the very air around her was echoing with the remnants of the power she had just fought. Amelia's heart still raced in her chest, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to wear off. She felt the sharp sting of exhaustion as the weight of what had just happened began to settle on her shoulders. She had done it. She had destroyed the heart of the Hallowed. But now she needed to move forward. She couldn't linger. The Hallowed may have been weakened, but it was not dead. She knew that as surely as she knew the air in her lungs. It was always there, like a shadow that would never quite leave. She glanced down at the pulsating light still clutched in her hand. The heart of the Hallowed, now fractured and dim, was not just a source of evil. It was something far more complex, a piece of an ancient force that had woven itself into the very fabric of the earth. But she had cracked it. She had taken the heart and torn it out. There was power in that, power that she had never known she possessed. But what now? She turned her eyes toward the forest, which was now oddly serene. The branches swayed gently, and the sound of the wind whispered through the trees like a lullaby. But beneath it, deep beneath the peaceful facade, Amelia could sense the Hallowed's lingering presence. Its roots were still embedded in the land, still threaded through the veins of the earth. It wasn't gone. It wasn't defeated. It had merely been stopped for now. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting. Something unseen. As she moved forward, the path ahead became clearer, though the shadows still reached for her, stretching long and distorted through the trees. The woods had once seemed like a labyrinth, a trap, a place where no escape could be found. But now, it felt almost alive, as if the forest itself was watching her, waiting to see how the story would unfold. The broken heart of the hollowed was no longer in her grasp. It had burned out in her hand, its energy fading as if it had given its last breath. She could feel the emptiness in the air where its power had once been. The world seemed to breathe with a kind of tentative stillness, like it was afraid to move too suddenly. And yet, as she walked, something strange began to happen. A faint whisper reached her ears, not from the trees, not from the wind, but from within her. It was soft, like a voice calling from far away, almost drowned out by the rhythm of her own thoughts. But it was unmistakable, like a memory from another life, a whisper from the hollowed that had managed to creep through her defenses. "It's not over. You haven't finished it." The voice was hers. It was unmistakably hers, but there was a darkness to it, a weight that seemed to grow heavier the longer she stood still. It was the hollowed, reaching into her mind, a part of her she couldn't quite escape, but it wasn't just a whisper. It was a thread, a strand of something that was now intertwined with her very being, something that had been woven into her soul. Her fingers clenched around the air, her heart tightening. The forest around her seemed to pulse again, as if responding to the words that had just rippled through her thoughts. She wasn't just walking through the woods. She was walking through the hollowed, a realm that no longer existed as a separate entity. It was inside her. And no matter how far she went, no matter how much she fought, it was a part of her now. The lines had blurred. A feeling of vertigo washed over her, as though the very ground beneath her was unstable. She stumbled slightly, her vision clouding for just a moment. The hollowed was pushing back, trying to reassert itself, trying to reclaim what had been lost. It wasn't going to fade quietly. It would claw its way back from the darkness, slowly but surely, until it had gathered enough strength to rise once more. But something inside her, the light, flared in response, pushing back against the growing cold. She could feel it deep in her chest, a warmth that pushed the shadows away. It wasn't as strong as it had been during her fight with the heart of the hollowed, but it was still there. It was her strength. The whisper came again, but this time, it was louder, more insistent. "You can never outrun me, Amelia. I am in your veins. You carry me within you." She flinched, but stood tall. The power of the hollowed was in her, yes, but it was not all it was. She had claimed the light. She had learned to channel it, to use it against the darkness. It was not about running. It was about facing it, accepting it, and learning to control it. "I don't need to outrun you," she said aloud, her voice firm and sure, even though the cold gnawed at her words. "I need to master you." The forest seemed to pause in response. The trees swayed, the wind died down, and a hush settled over the woods like a blanket. The very air held its breath as Amelia's words rang through the quiet. The hollowed wasn't a force to be eradicated. It was a force to be controlled, tempered by the light that was now within her. She had been its prey, its victim, but no more. She was no longer just its vessel. She was its counterforce, the opposite that could break its hold, the one thing that could stand against it. With that resolve solidifying in her chest, Amelia began walking again, more purposefully this time. Her body was tired and her mind was weary, but there was something new in her, a clarity, a strength that she hadn't felt before. The hollowed might have left its mark on her, but it would not define her. She would not be consumed. The path ahead was unclear, and there would be no simple resolution, no neatly tied-up ending. She would face what came. She would fight again and again as long as it took. She knew, deep in her bones, that she had not finished with the hollowed yet. But this time she was ready. The wind whispered through the trees, and somewhere far in the distance, a low, mournful howl echoed through the night. But Amelia was not afraid. She had come too far. She had faced the darkness and walked through its depths. Now she was a force of her own, a force that would never be silenced. The hollowed had met its match, and so had she. The path ahead was not clear, but Amelia walked forward with a purpose, the weight of the hollowed's presence still hanging in the air, like the ghost of a storm that had passed but left its mark. The forest, though eerily quiet now, felt alive in a way it never had before. Every rustling leaf, every crack in the earth beneath her, seemed like a whisper, a pulse of energy, as if the woods themselves were aware of the battle that had just been fought and were waiting for something more. Her steps were heavy, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She had ripped the Hollowed's heart from the very land, had severed its direct hold on this place. But the connection between her and the Hollowed wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, deep and unshakable, a thread that had woven itself into the very fabric of her being. And though she had fought to break free, she knew the war wasn't over. The Hollowed had been torn from the world for now, but it had not vanished. It was a part of the land, a part of her, and that piece would always remain. But there was something else in the air. Something new. Something shifting. Amelia paused, her senses flaring as she scanned the forest around her. The air had thickened again, not with the weight of darkness, but with an unnatural tension, a tension that felt like the calm before a storm. She could feel the land reacting, responding to the ebbing pulse of the Hollowed, but this wasn't the same hollow, oppressive energy she'd fought before. This felt different. A low rumble rolled through the ground, not unlike the deep vibration she had felt in the heart of the Hollowed. But this time it wasn't a crack. It wasn't a rupture in the world's fabric. It was something more like awakening. The trees around her shuddered, and a distant, echoing howl ripped through the night. The sound was haunting, an ancient, mournful cry that seemed to resonate with every living thing in the forest. It was the kind of sound that made the blood in her veins run cold. And yet she didn't retreat. She couldn't. She wasn't running anymore. The Hollowed had marked her, had scarred her, but it had also taught her. It had forced her to confront her deepest fears, to learn the balance of light and shadow, of power and restraint. She had taken control of the darkness, and now she would use it, not to destroy but to understand. The howl came again, closer this time, and Amelia's pulse quickened. There was something primal about it, a force calling to her, urging her to follow. She moved forward cautiously, her every step deliberate. The trees around her seemed to bend with the weight of her presence, as though the forest itself was reacting to the pull of the Hollowed within her. The branches creaked, their leaves rustling in a way that felt almost like a whisper. "You are the Hollowed's child." Amelia froze, the voice slipping into her mind, familiar yet distant, like the echo of a dream. It was the Hollowed's voice, but it wasn't the same as before. It was softer now, quieter, but there was no mistaking its presence. "You cannot deny what you are." The voice was insistent, its words laced with an ancient wisdom that sent a chill through her. The Hollowed is not just a force of destruction. It is a force of transformation. It is change, rebirth. It is in your blood, in your bones. Amelia clenched her fists, fighting the surge of fear that rose within her. The Hollowed's voice was not her own anymore. It was a part of her, yes, but it was also something separate. Something other. Something that wanted to pull her deeper into the shadows. But she would not fall for it. She had already faced it. She had already rejected it once. And she would do so again. "I am not yours," she muttered under her breath, her voice low but steady. "I never was." The forest seemed to sigh in response, the wind carrying her words away into the trees. But the howl came again, closer still. Amelia wasn't sure how much farther she could go. The Hollowed was everywhere, in everything. She could feel its threads in the ground beneath her, in the air she breathed. It had left its mark on this world, on her, and perhaps it always would. But she couldn't let it consume her. Not again. She had fought for her life, fought for this world, and she had won. But the fight was never truly over. The howls grew louder now, no longer distant echoes but close, too close. There was something else, too, something underneath the sound. The shifting of the earth beneath her feet, the sense of a presence moving through the woods, something ancient and powerful that had lain dormant for too long. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone. A shadow flickered at the edge of her vision, moving with an unnatural grace, slipping between the trees. It was too fast, too silent. It was something else, something that had been waiting in the dark, biding its time until the Hollowed's heart had been shattered. "Who are you?" Amelia whispered, though she knew it wasn't the right question. She had a feeling she already knew the answer. There was no reply, only the sound of the trees groaning, their branches creaking as something moved between them. Amelia could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The air was charged with something ancient, something untouchable. And then she saw it, a figure not like the keeper but something darker. It was tall, impossibly so, its form long and sinewy, like the shadows of the forest had taken shape. Its body seemed to shift with the light as if it was not quite there, moving like a ghost caught in the wind. For a moment their eyes met, if eyes they could be called. It had no features to speak of, just an endless void where its face should have been, blacker than the shadows themselves. You have torn the heart from the hollowed, the figure intoned, its voice like a cold wind. But the hollowed is not a thing that can be destroyed. It is not a monster, not a god. It is a cycle. And you have only opened the door. Amelia's throat tightened. She didn't know what it was, but she could feel its power radiating from it like heat from a fire. She had faced the hollowed itself, but this creature, this thing, was something different. This was no mere shadow, no distant echo. This was the origin. It wasn't just the hollowed she had been fighting. It was what came before. The figure took a step forward, its form shifting like smoke, its voice growing louder in her mind, whispering, "We are nothing without the hollowed. We are everything within it. And you have not killed it. You have only woken what lies beneath." Amelia's heart thundered in her chest as she backed away, her breath shallow, the weight of the creature's presence bearing down on her. The air had thickened again, growing heavy with the pull of something vast and ancient. Something tied to the hollowed, yes, but beyond it, older than time itself. The creature stretched out its hand, a long, twisted arm that seemed to break the very space around it. Amelia could see now that its fingers were not fingers at all, but tendrils, extensions of the shadows that lived within the forest itself. "You are not the first," it whispered, its voice not in her ears but in her mind, "to believe you can control the hollowed. And you will not be the last. But you will be the first to understand. The hollowed is not the enemy, Amelia. It is the test." Her pulse hammered in her throat, but in the darkness of that moment, one thing was clear. She had only just begun to understand the true nature of the hollowed. And she had just awakened something far darker than she could have ever imagined. "Then let me finish it." The words were not her own, but they came from deep within her chest, sharp, raw, a challenge to the darkness before her. She wouldn't run. She would face this as she had faced the hollowed. And she would win. The creature's void-like gaze flickered with something. Amusement? Recognition? And then it smiled. But it wasn't its lips that moved. It was the shadows. Amelia stood in the stillness of the clearing, her heart thumping in her chest like a drumbeat of war. The creature before her seemed to pulse with darkness, its tendrils extending like fingers of smoke, reaching for her, weaving through the very fabric of the air. It had no face, no eyes, but it watched and it felt, its presence overwhelming in a way that made the very ground beneath her seem to tremble. The shadows around it flickered and shifted, distorting with each subtle movement as if they were alive in a way that had nothing to do with her own heartbeat or breath. The forest around her seemed to lean in, listening, waiting, as though the trees themselves knew that something new had arrived, something ancient and unfathomable. Amelia's throat was dry, but her resolve was firmer than it had ever been. The hollowed's whispers still buzzed in her mind, but they had faded into a distant hum, replaced by the pulsing rhythm of something darker, more primordial. This creature before her, this shifting thing of darkness, was a force that had existed long before the hollowed. It was older, deeper. A remnant of a time when shadows ruled the land and the earth had not yet known light. "You are not the first to come here," the creature spoke again, its voice a ripple of sound, cold and dripping with ancient malice. The words echoed in her mind, lingering like a fog that refused to lift. "You will not be the last. You may have torn the heart from the hollowed, but that was only a single branch of the root. And the root remains." It stretched out a tendril toward her, the air thick with its dark essence, but Amelia didn't flinch. She stood tall, meeting the creature's unseen gaze with defiance in her eyes. "Then I will tear it all out," she said, her voice steady, as though her words alone could cut through the fog of uncertainty and fear. A pulse of dark energy emanated from the creature, and the ground beneath her feet began to vibrate with the power of it. Amelia's body stiffened as she felt the pull of the darkness, a gravitational force that wanted to draw her in, wanted to drag her into its depths. The shadows writhed around her feet, like serpents ready to strike, but she fought against it, forcing herself to stay grounded. The creature's form shifted again, its tendrils twisting and bending, its darkness folding in on itself, like a wound in the fabric of reality. "You misunderstand, Amelia," the creature hissed. "The hollowed is only a fragment of what is to come. You have only brushed against the surface of the power that lies beneath this world. The shadows that slumber here are not meant to be defeated. They are meant to be embraced, accepted." The air thickened again, and the shadows pressed in around her, closing the space between them. But this time something changed. She could feel it. The weight of the creature's presence was no longer just oppressive. It was tempting. She could feel its pull, like a whispering hunger in the depths of her mind. The shadows offered something that the hollowed never had, the promise of totality, of unification, of a power that could consume everything, a power that was complete. Amelia closed her eyes for a brief moment, her breath steadying. She could feel it, the darkness inside her. The part of her that had been twisted by the hollowed, the part that had been marked by the shadows. And as much as she loathed it, there was something undeniable about it. Something familiar. She had tasted its power before. Don't listen to it, she thought, her mind struggling against the temptation to let go, to allow the darkness to swallow her. You faced the hollowed. This is nothing but another illusion. Her eyes snapped open, and she met the creature's void-like gaze once more. This time, the shadows that wrapped around her felt different. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of what was being offered. The creature's voice was soft now, almost coaxing. You can take it all. You can become what you are destined to be. You could reshape this world, Amelia. You could make it your own. But only if you join us. Only if you embrace the shadows that run through your veins. For a moment, Amelia's vision blurred as the temptation of its words filled her mind. She could see herself standing above the world, a ruler of shadows, a being of pure power. She could feel the warmth of it, know the heat, the burning pull of it, wrapping around her heart, offering her everything she had ever wanted. The hollowed's whispers merged with the creature's, forming a single, undeniable call. Join us. Become us. Her chest tightened, and the shadows began to feel like something warm, something right. And for a moment, she thought she could almost reach out and claim it, let go of her human frailties, her fear, and take hold of the darkness that had always been there, just beneath the surface. The hollowed had shown her the power of the dark, but this was something deeper, something older, something that would make her more than she had ever dreamed. But then a flicker of light rose within her, a memory of the warmth she had once felt when she had faced the hollowed's heart. The power that had surged through her when she had taken control of the light that had refused to bow to the shadows. You are not the darkness, she reminded herself, her voice low but firm. You are not its slave. You never were. The shadows twisted in the air around her, curling like smoke, and the creature's voice turned sharper, more insistent. You are the darkness, Amelia. You always have been. You can't outrun it. You can't hide from it. You can only embrace it. But Amelia's eyes flared with defiance, her hands clenching at her sides. No. She could feel the light deep within her, that steady pulse of resistance against the darkness. The hollowed had tried to claim her. It had tried to make her its vessel. But she had fought back. And now, this creature, this thing that had lived in the shadows long before the hollowed, was trying to seduce her into the same fate. She would not fall. With a roar of determination, Amelia thrust her hands forward, reaching out toward the dark figure. Her mind flooded with the light that had always been there, the light she had fought for, the light that was her true power. She could feel it building within her, rising from the depths, pushing back against the shadows like the dawn breaking through the night. The energy of the forest surged with her, the roots, the trees, the very ground beneath her feet. All of it responded to the light she called forth. The creature recoiled, its form flickering, its tendrils pulling back as though burned by the very light Amelia had summoned. It hissed, a sound of ancient frustration, but Amelia's grip on the light tightened, and it flared brighter, a searing force that ripped through the darkness. You cannot destroy us, the creature hissed, its voice breaking, distorting as though the shadows themselves were shattering. We are eternal. And so am I, Amelia replied, her voice steady, unwavering. The light around her intensified, blazing through the forest, burning away the tendrils of shadow that had tried to ensnare her. The creature's form shattered, breaking apart into a cloud of smoke and dark mist, its presence disintegrating under the power of the light she wielded. The shadows screamed as they scattered, their voices fading into the distance. The air around her began to clear, and the oppressive weight of the forest lifted. The trees, once twisted and gnarled, now stood tall and proud, their leaves shimmering in the new light. Amelia stood in the midst of the clearing, breathing heavily, her heart still racing with the aftershocks of the battle. The creature was gone, its dark influence erased for now. But Amelia knew that the shadows would always be there, waiting in the corners of the world, waiting to pull her back. She had faced the hollowed. She had faced the creature that lived in the deep, ancient darkness of the earth. And she had won. But the war was far from over. With a final glance at the shifting woods, Amelia turned and walked away, her heart steady and her mind focused. She was not the darkness. She was not the hollowed. She was something more. And as long as she walked this earth, the shadows would never again claim her. Amelia's steps were slow but purposeful as she moved away from the clearing, the last remnants of the dark creature's presence dissipating behind her like mist in the morning sun. The forest around her, once thick with the suffocating weight of the hollowed and its shadows, now felt different, lighter, more open. The very air seemed to breathe a little easier, as though the land itself had been exhaling a long-held breath. But beneath that calm, there was an undeniable hum, a lingering pulse in the earth that spoke of something unfinished. The hollowed had not been completely eradicated. It wasn't just the thing in the shadows that she had faced, it was a force that had woven itself into the world, into the fabric of the very land itself. The hollowed could not simply be banished. It was as old as the roots of the trees, as deep as the soil beneath her feet. It was an echo that ran through time, through the bones of the earth. And now that she had fought it, now that she had torn at its core, the world would never be the same. Her heart was still racing from the battle, the aftershocks of that final confrontation still rippling through her body. She could feel the lingering weight of the creature's darkness, not as a presence but as a memory, as if its touch had left an indelible mark on her soul. But with each step, she forced it back, pushing it into the recesses of her mind where it could not reach her. She had not been defeated. She had not been consumed. And that was what mattered most. The path ahead was unclear, but Amelia was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had learned, in the darkest moments, that fear was only a shadow of its own, a specter that could be vanquished with strength and clarity of purpose. She had faced the hollowed, and she had faced the shadows that had tried to take her. She was no longer running. As she walked deeper into the forest, she began to sense something else. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the wind, a change in the way the trees whispered. It was a new presence, not dark, not threatening, but alive. There was a softness to the air now, a warmth that had not been there before, and it felt like the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds after a long storm. Amelia paused, her gaze lifting to the canopy above her. The storm clouds that had once blanketed the sky had parted, revealing the first slivers of pale light. The rain that had drenched the forest for so long had finally ceased, leaving behind a fresh, crisp scent in the air. The world was awakening. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the new energy of the forest. The earth beneath her feet felt solid, grounded. There was a stability here now, a sense of balance that had been lost when the hollowed first began to creep into the world. Her thoughts drifted back to the heart of the hollowed, to the creature in the shadows, and to the moment she had torn the dark energy from the land. She had learned that the hollowed was not simply an evil force. It was part of the world, a force that shaped everything, that helped define the balance of light and dark. But it was also something that needed to be contained, something that could never fully be allowed to spread its roots too deep into the earth, lest it swallow everything in its path. Balance, she thought. It was always about balance. She had wielded the hollowed's energy, but she had never succumbed to it. The light inside her had fought back, had pierced through the darkness like a sword. She had learned that even in the deepest shadows, there was light to be found. And in that light, she had found her true power, not by denying the darkness, but by understanding it. By embracing the reality that both darkness and light had their place in the world, but neither should be allowed to rule unchecked. Amelia looked up again, her gaze drawn toward a cluster of trees ahead, their trunks twisted and ancient, their branches gnarled but strong. She had seen them before. She recognized them from the first time she had ventured into the woods, when the hollowed had first begun to whisper its dark promises. They had seemed so distant, so unreachable then, shrouded in shadows. But now they felt like beacons, their roots deep in the earth, their branches reaching for the sky. The forest had endured. She walked toward them, her footsteps light on the soft earth, until she reached the heart of the grove. The trees seemed to stand taller here, their presence more formidable, yet there was a gentle energy in the air, something ancient and wise. And then she saw it. A small, delicate flower had bloomed at the base of one of the trees, a white flower, its petals shimmering with a soft, ethereal glow. It was the first flower she had seen in this forest that was not twisted or darkened by the hollowed. This was something new, something pure. It was the kind of bloom that only grew after a storm had passed, after the darkness had been fought back and the land had been allowed to heal. Amelia crouched down beside it, reaching out slowly to touch the soft petals. She could feel its energy, calm and steady, pulsing gently beneath her fingertips. It was the symbol of what had been won here today, the symbol of a world beginning to heal. Her heart swelled with a deep sense of gratitude, of peace, as if the forest itself was offering its thanks to her. The struggle had not been easy and the battle was not yet over, but in this moment, the weight of it all felt lighter. The land was still alive, still full of possibility. The hollowed had not claimed it. And as long as she lived, neither would the shadows. Amelia stood up, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. She had fought the Hollowed. She had faced the darkness and the shadows, and she had survived. Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. She had learned that true strength didn't come from the absence of fear, but from the ability to stand firm in the face of it. She smiled, the first real smile she had felt since entering these woods so long ago. There was still much to be done, much more to learn, but for now, the forest was quiet, the sky clear, and the air filled with a sense of peace that had been long denied. With the light of dawn beginning to filter through the trees, Amelia turned and began walking, knowing that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more forces that would test her strength. But she had faced the Hollowed, faced the darkest parts of herself in the world, and she had overcome. She was ready for whatever came next. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Amelia could see the path ahead clearly. And in that path, she would forge her own future. One of balance, of light and dark, of strength and understanding. The forest whispered around her, the wind rustling through the leaves, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. And as she walked, the shadows that had once seemed so dark and unyielding slowly began to fade, their grip loosening on the land, their presence no longer a threat. They had no power over her now. Amelia had taken control, and the world would not be the same. Would be better. And she would make sure of it. The soft golden light of dawn spilled through the trees, casting a delicate glow over the path Amelia walked. The forest, still damp from the rain that had come before, glistened in the quiet morning, as if it were freshly reborn. The air smelled of earth and wet leaves, of something new and hopeful. The wind rustled through the trees like a sigh, whispering secrets to the world, secrets only the forest could know. With each step, Amelia felt the weight of the journey shift, lighten, though she knew it was far from over. The Hollowed had not been defeated in the way that she had once imagined. Its heart had been torn out, but its essence was not so easily wiped from the world. Its mark remained, etched into the earth, in the roots of the trees, in the deepest crevices of the land. It was a part of the world now, as it always had been, but so too was she a part of it. She wasn't the same person who had first entered these woods, driven by fear and uncertainty. She had faced the Hollowed, had fought it with every ounce of her being, and had survived. She had learned the true meaning of balance, that light and dark could coexist, not as enemies but as forces that shaped and defined the world. She had learned that darkness could be harnessed, not destroyed, and that light could pierce through even the thickest of shadows. The forest ahead was still, but Amelia could feel the quiet hum of life beneath the surface. The land was healing, but it would take time. Nature had a way of regrowing, of rebirthing itself after destruction, but the scars of the Hollowed would not vanish overnight. The balance had been disrupted, and it would take patience, care, and understanding to restore it fully. Amelia's thoughts turned back to the flowers, the white bloom she had found earlier, still glowing faintly where it had been planted at the base of the ancient tree. The delicate petals had seemed to shimmer with a soft, healing light, a symbol of the new growth that would soon come. It was not just a sign of hope, but of something more, renewal. And with that thought, a new understanding began to settle in her heart. She was not just the one who had fought against the Hollowed. She was the one who had torn open the path for healing, for the possibility of a world that was not forever tethered to the darkness. She could be the bridge between the two worlds, the light that pushed back the dark, the force that could restore the balance. The wind shifted, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of damp earth, and with it came a ripple of energy from deep within the forest, like the pulse of a heartbeat. Amelia's gaze swept over the trees, and for a moment she thought she saw a flash of movement in the distance, something dark, fleeting, but gone before she could fully grasp it. Her instincts flared for a second, a reminder that the Hollowed's influence wasn't gone, not entirely. It was still there, just below the surface, but she did not fear it anymore. The light inside her was growing stronger, a beacon that would guide her through the rest of the darkness. She had learned that the Hollowed was not an external force to be vanquished. It was a part of the cycle of life, as much a part of the earth as the trees, the rivers, and the stars above. And she would not fight it blindly anymore. She would understand it, wield it, and in time she would teach others to do the same. Her journey, her true journey, was just beginning. The road ahead was unclear, the future shrouded in mist, but she felt no fear. There was no longer any need to run from the shadows. She had learned to face them, to accept them as part of the world, just as the sun and the moon shared the sky, day and night following each other in an endless dance. The sun rose higher, its golden rays warming her face, and Amelia smiled softly, the first true smile of peace she had felt in a long while. Her body ached, her mind was tired, but her spirit was alive. And for the first time she felt as though she was not just surviving but living. As she continued her walk through the forest, a sound drifted through the trees, soft and distant at first but growing louder. It was a song, the kind that only the forest could sing, carried on the breeze. It was a melody she had never heard before, but it was familiar, like an old lullaby sung in the quiet of the night. She stopped, listening intently. The birds, the wind, and the rustling leaves were all part of the music now, each sound melding together in harmony. The forest was no longer just a place of fear and shadows. It had become something more. It was a sanctuary, a refuge, a place of endless potential, where darkness and light could exist together and shape the world in ways no one could yet fully understand. Amelia's eyes scanned the horizon, the vast expanse of the forest before her. She had seen so much, fought so hard, and yet there was still so much to discover. The Hallowed might have been a force she could never fully eradicate, but it no longer held sway over her or the land. It was only a part of the greater cycle, the endless dance between light and shadow. She stepped forward, the path ahead still winding and uncertain, but the uncertainty no longer made her anxious. She didn't have to know every step before she took it. She had learned that trusting in the journey was enough. The forest, with all its secrets and dangers, was a part of her now. She would protect it just as it had protected her. The connection between her and the land was one she would never again doubt. As she moved deeper into the forest, the morning light grew stronger, filling the trees with a soft, golden glow. The shadows began to retreat, not vanquished but integrated, as if they were folding themselves into the world rather than ruling over it. The balance was being restored, slowly but surely. Amelia paused again, her senses sharpening as she felt the air shift once more. There was something ahead, something waiting, something alive. But this time it wasn't a threat. It was a presence, a being, something new. She could feel its energy, a gentle pull like the tide rising and falling against the shore. She wasn't afraid. Whatever it was, she was ready. She walked forward, her heart steady, her mind clear. There were still mysteries to uncover, still forces to understand, but she no longer needed to fear the unknown. She had already faced the darkest parts of herself and the world, and had emerged stronger. The forest would always be a place of uncertainty, of hidden dangers and untold secrets. But it was also a place of infinite possibility, and Amelia had become part of that possibility. In the distance, a faint shimmer of light caught her eye, a soft, beckoning glow. She stepped toward it, knowing that whatever lay ahead, she would face it as she had faced everything before, with strength, with courage, and with the knowledge that the darkness could never fully hold her. She had walked through the shadows, and now she walked toward the light. And she was not alone. The deeper Amelia ventured into the forest, the more she felt the weight of the land shifting. The forest had always been alive, of course, but now it seemed to pulse with an energy that felt both ancient and new, as if the roots themselves were breathing with her. The trees no longer seemed like mere witnesses to the world. They felt like guardians, old and wise, standing vigilant against the darkness. Their boughs stretched high above, their branches swaying gently in the breeze as if they too had come to life in the aftermath of the battle with the Hallowed. With each step, the forest seemed to open before her. The shadows that had once clung to the trees and the ground were still there, but they were no longer oppressive. They had receded into the corners, allowing the light to shine through. The beams of the morning sun filtered through the thick canopy above, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor, illuminating the path ahead. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and growing things, fresh moss, the dampness of the leaves, the faint sweetness of hidden flowers. It was a scent of life and renewal, as though the forest were in the midst of a slow, careful rebirth. Amelia's heart, which had been heavy with uncertainty and exhaustion, now beat with a steady rhythm. There was still much to be done, much to learn, but the weight that had once pressed upon her chest had lifted. The battle with the Hallowed was over, for now, and the land was healing. But in the quiet after the storm, the forest spoke to her in ways it never had before. There was something here, something deeper, something waiting to be understood. She paused for a moment and closed her eyes, her senses sharpening as she allowed the forest whispers to wash over her. There was no longer the oppressive weight of the Hallowed, no longer the constant pressure of fear and uncertainty. In their place was a soft, reassuring hum, a gentle pulse that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The land is waking, she thought, a deep sense of recognition stirring within her. The ground beneath her feet was alive, not just with the roots and the life of the trees, but with something older, something more primal. This was the heartbeat of the world itself, the rhythm that had been disturbed but never truly broken. The sound of distant rushing water caught her attention, and she turned toward it. A stream, a small, bubbling river, appeared ahead, winding its way through the underbrush. The water sparkled in the light, its surface shimmering with reflections of the sun. Amelia stepped toward it, drawn by its peaceful energy, and crouched beside the water. She let her fingers graze the cool surface, feeling the gentle flow beneath her touch. The water was crystal clear, the stones at the bottom visible, the flow steady and unhurried. This was the kind of balance she had fought for, the balance she now realized the forest had always held, beneath the layers of darkness and shadow. Life and death, growth and decay, light and dark. All these forces were in constant flux, constantly shifting, but always part of the same cycle. The Hallowed had been a disruption in that cycle, a force that had sought to overpower the natural order, to drown out the light and consume everything in its wake. But the forest had not allowed that. The land had fought back, and in the process, it had shown Amelia something she hadn't fully understood before. The Hallowed had been a symptom of something larger, a reminder that every force, every power, even darkness, had its place in the world. It was not that the darkness was inherently evil, nor the light entirely pure. It was the balance between them that created life, that created the world. And Amelia, in her own journey, had learned to navigate that balance, to not fear the dark, but to accept it as part of the whole. She stood up from the stream, feeling the cool air brush against her skin, and for the first time since entering the forest, she felt truly in it. Not a visitor, not a stranger, but a part of its pulse, a thread woven into its very fabric. As she continued along the stream, she came upon a small glade. The sunlight here was brighter, the trees thinner, their trunks reaching toward the sky in a way that gave the glade a feeling of openness, of possibility. The ground was covered in soft ferns and wildflowers, their delicate petals catching the light. In the center of the glade was a single, massive tree, its trunk thick and gnarled, its branches sprawling out in every direction. Its bark shimmered with a faint, iridescent glow, as though it were a living conduit for the light of the sun. The tree stood alone, but it felt like the heart of this place, its presence solid and grounding. Amelia approached the tree slowly, her eyes tracing the veins of its bark, the way the light danced across its surface. There was something ancient about this tree, something sacred, and yet it was alive, vibrant, full of energy. It was as if this tree had witnessed the rise and fall of many ages, had seen countless storms pass through, and yet it remained. She stood at the base of the tree, her hand resting lightly on its trunk. The connection was immediate, a surge of warmth running through her fingertips, up her arm and into her chest. It was a feeling of being rooted, of being anchored to something larger than herself. It was a sensation she had felt before, in fleeting moments of clarity during the battle with the Hallowed. But now it was stronger, more intense. This was not just a tree, it was the very soul of the forest, and in touching it she could feel its pulse, its ancient wisdom, and its power. The world is alive, she thought again, the realization settling deeper in her heart. And I am part of it. The tree's energy seemed to beckon her, urging her to reach deeper, to understand more. As her hand pressed further into the bark, her vision blurred, and the sounds of the forest seemed to fade away. Instead, she felt herself falling into the depths of the earth, into the roots of the tree, into the roots of the land itself. She was no longer standing in the glade. She was inside it, beneath it, moving with the pulse of the earth, the rhythm of the forest, as if she were one with it. Her breath slowed as she sank deeper into the vision, her body becoming light, untethered. The landscape before her shifted, and she found herself standing at the edge of a great forest, a forest far older than the one she had just left. The trees here were colossal, their trunks thick and towering, their canopies lost in the clouds. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, but there was a faint glow in the distance, as if the very land itself was lit from within. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking slowly toward her. It was not human, not fully, but it was familiar. She had seen it before, the Keeper. But this time it was different. It was not the Keeper she had faced in battle. This was a creature of the forest, a being that belonged to the land, older than any of the things she had encountered. It moved with grace, its presence gentle but commanding, as though it were the embodiment of the forest itself. The Keeper's voice echoed in her mind, soft but clear. "You have learned much, Amelia. The forest has accepted you, and you are now a part of its pulse. But this is not the end of your journey." Amelia nodded, though she felt no fear. The Keeper's presence was not one of threat. It was one of invitation, of guidance. She had come to understand the nature of the Hallowed, of balance, but now the Keeper was showing her something more, something larger. The Keeper extended its hand toward her, a gesture of understanding, of connection. The forest is not just a place of refuge, of safety. It is a place of growth, for everything, even darkness. But you must walk carefully now. You are the bridge between the light and the dark, and the path ahead is yours to shape. The forest will help you, but only if you choose to walk with it. Amelia looked down at the outstretched hand, feeling the weight of the decision before her. The forest was asking her to become something more, to embrace her place in the world and the cycle of life it held. And with that, Amelia took the keeper's hand, ready to continue her journey, not as a lone wanderer, but as a protector of the balance, a keeper of the land. The forest's pulse beat steadily around her, and for the first time she understood what it meant to truly be part of the world. To be both light and dark, both healer and protector. The journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid. She was home. The forest around Amelia seemed to hold its breath as the keeper's presence settled around her like a thick, ancient fog. The energy between them was palpable, the ground beneath her feet humming with power. The keeper's form was not bound by flesh or bone, not in the way of human beings, but it was unmistakably real. It was the embodiment of the forest itself, every leaf, every root, every whisper in the wind, and it was offering her a path. Not just a physical path, but one woven into the fabric of the world, one that would test her, shape her, and ultimately define her place in the grand cycle of light and dark. The keeper's eyes, if they could be called eyes, were vast, endless pools of green and brown, the colors of the forest itself. They held the weight of the world, the centuries of wisdom and secrets passed down through the trees. And though it did not speak again, its silent gaze was enough. Amelia could feel the weight of the forest around her, its ancient power, its quiet, constant rhythm. It was as though the trees themselves were watching her, waiting for her to make her next move. She was no longer an outsider here. She was within it. Her heart beat in time with the rhythm of the forest, her breath in sync with the wind that whispered through the leaves. But the path ahead, the one she had taken by accepting the keeper's hand, was not without its burdens. She knew that. She had faced darkness before, felt it slither beneath her skin, threatening to consume her, but she had learned in the depths of the hollow's grip that darkness was not something to be destroyed. It was something to be understood. The keeper's hand remained outstretched, waiting for her response. Amelia took a steadying breath. She had learned much on her journey, about the land, about herself, and about the delicate balance that held the world together. The hollowed had been a force of imbalance, a shadow that had sought to smother everything in its path. But she was not the same as she had been before. She had learned the price of pushing too far in one direction, of seeking power without understanding its roots. Her fingers, trembling slightly, brushed against the keeper's hand, and for a moment, the world seemed to fall away. The next thing Amelia knew, she was no longer standing in the glade, but in a place that was both nowhere and everywhere. The trees still surrounded her, but their forms had shifted, as if the very essence of the forest had taken on an entirely new dimension. The air was thick with an almost electric charge, and the ground beneath her feet felt alive, pulsing with the life force of the land itself. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the birdsong, the wind, were absent, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. The keeper stood beside her, its form now a fluid silhouette, its presence stretching out like a vast shadow over the land. Amelia felt the weight of it pressing against her, as if the entire forest was aware of her in this moment. Each tree, each root, each leaf, every breath of wind. It was as though the forest was watching her progress with anticipation, waiting for her to understand what it had to offer. "You are standing on the threshold," the keeper's voice echoed in her mind, soft and distant yet impossibly close. "What lies beyond this point is the beginning of your true path." Amelia looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. The air felt thick with energy, charged with ancient power. She felt a deep sense of connection to this place, something deeper than the bond she had felt with the land before. This was not simply a forest anymore. It was alive in ways she hadn't yet understood. She was a part of it now, part of its heartbeat, part of its rhythm. The threshold, she thought, the words hanging heavy in her mind. What was it? And what was beyond it? The keeper seemed to sense her question. "The path you walk now is not one of certainty. The forest does not offer answers, it offers choices. And with each choice the balance shifts. You have learned the ways of light and dark, but there are other forces at play here, forces older and deeper than you can imagine. The choices you make will shape not just your future, but the future of the land itself." Amelia's gaze swept across the shifting landscape. The trees here were different, their trunks twisted into spirals that seemed to reach up toward the sky like a network of veins. Their roots stretched far and wide, sinking deep into the earth, pulsing with energy. The ground was uneven, marked with strange patterns that pulsed with a faint glow. The air was thick with a sense of potential, as though anything could happen here, any change could ripple through the world, sending shockwaves into the very bones of the earth. A distant sound reached her ears, soft, melodic, almost like a song carried on the wind. It was beautiful, but there was something eerie about it too, as though the song was sung by voices that had long been forgotten. Amelia turned toward the sound, but the keeper's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You must walk the path ahead with awareness," it said. "Not all who are drawn to the song are meant to follow it. The forest speaks in many tongues, some of which are not meant for you to hear." Amelia felt a shiver crawl up her spine. The song, the voices, it was as if they were calling to her, beckoning her into the depths of the forest. She felt the pull, a gentle tug in the pit of her stomach, but something within her resisted. She had learned to listen to the forest whispers, but not all of its calls were meant to be answered. She had learned that in the depths of the hollowed, the forest could deceive, could lead one astray if not approached with caution. But what was this song? And who was singing it? A figure appeared through the trees, tall, shadowed, its features obscured. It moved with an eerie grace, its steps soundless on the forest floor. The air seemed to grow colder, the atmosphere thickening with a palpable sense of something ancient, something powerful. The figure stepped closer, and Amelia could see its shape more clearly now, a humanoid form cloaked in tattered vine-like garments. Its face was obscured by a hood, its eyes glowing faintly through the shadows, an otherworldly light that seemed to pulse in time with the song. The forest's energy hummed with its presence, and Amelia felt a mixture of awe and unease. It stopped just before her, standing silently in the space between the keeper and herself. The figure's voice, when it spoke, was not a sound but a feeling that rippled through the air, vibrating in Amelia's chest. "You have come far," it said, the words like a whisper carried by the wind, yet they seemed to fill the entire space around her. "But you are not alone in this journey. The forest is full of watchers, of beings who see the path ahead more clearly than you do. There are forces at play here that will test your resolve." Amelia stood still, unsure of what to say. She had learned much in her travels, but this presence, this being, felt different. It felt as if it knew her, not just her name or her history, but something deeper, something she couldn't yet understand. The keeper stepped forward, its form becoming more solid, more defined. "This one is a guardian of the deeper forest," it said softly. "It watches over those who seek the ancient power that lies beneath the earth, beneath the roots. But its guidance is not always what it seems." Amelia's gaze flickered back to the figure, sensing a deeper warning in the keeper's words. The forest was not just a place of balance and renewal, it was a place of testing. And now, with the figure before her, she understood that not all paths led to enlightenment. Some paths, if followed too blindly, would lead to destruction. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if it were reading her thoughts, its glowing eyes narrowing. "I offer you a choice," it said, the words heavy with meaning. "There is more than one way to heal the land. Some paths demand sacrifice, others, corruption." It let the word hang in the air, a dark whisper that sent a chill down Amelia's spine. "Choose wisely." The song grew louder, now a haunting chorus that seemed to swirl around her, wrapping around her like a blanket of thorns. Amelia could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on her, the path before her now shrouded in shadows. She glanced at the keeper, seeking some form of guidance, but the ancient being only stood silently, its eyes reflecting the eternal watch of the forest. Amelia took a deep breath, her heart racing. The path she had walked thus far had been one of light and dark, of balance and resistance. But the forces that were stirring now were greater than any she had faced before. The forest was testing her once more. And this time the choice she made would change everything. The wind whispered again, the trees bending toward her, urging her to listen. She stepped forward, ready to face what lay ahead. The forest was waiting. Amelia's breath came in slow, measured gasps as she stepped further into the shifting, ethereal space, where the fabric of reality seemed to tremble beneath her feet. The trees around her had grown taller, more twisted, their branches woven together like the threads of an ancient tapestry. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss and the deep, musty smell of old growth, of life and death intertwined in the cycles of nature. The ground beneath her feet was soft with the decay of ages, yet it pulsed with a strange, invigorating energy. The forest was alive, yes, but in a way that felt almost sentient. The figure standing before her, cloaked in vine and shadow, radiated an energy so ancient that it felt as though it had witnessed the birth of the forest itself. Its eyes, glowing with that eerie, otherworldly light, were focused on her with an intensity that made her feel as though it could see into the very depths of her soul. Yet, despite the foreboding sense of power it exuded, there was no malice in its presence. It was simply there, an observer, a keeper of secrets, a guardian of the ancient ways. Amelia stood still, her heart beating loudly in her chest. She could hear the song now more clearly than before, its haunting melody weaving through the air like a siren's call. It was a song that seemed to pulse with a deep, primal rhythm, one that resonated with the deepest parts of her being. It beckoned her, inviting her to listen, to understand, to follow. Yet, at the same time, there was something in it that warned her, a subtle undertone of danger that could not be ignored. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging the conflict within her. Its voice was a low, resonant hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air. "Every force in this forest has its purpose, Amelia," it said, its voice like the whisper of wind through dry leaves. "Light, darkness, growth, decay. They are all part of the same cycle. And you too are part of it. But there are paths here that are not meant for you to walk. And there are choices that, once made, cannot be undone." Amelia's gaze shifted toward the keeper, who had remained silent, its presence unwavering. There was a quiet understanding in its eyes, one that spoke of ages of wisdom and knowledge, of cycles long past. The keeper had never steered her wrong, but this new presence, this guardian, spoke of deeper things, of older forces that Amelia had not yet fully grasped. "Corruption," the figure had said. The word echoed in her mind, a dark thread that twisted through the fabric of her thoughts. The figure had offered her a choice, a path of healing or a path of corruption. What did that mean? What kind of choices could the forest be asking her to make? And how would those choices shape the land, the people, and herself? The song had quieted now, its haunting melody replaced by a deep silence that pressed in on her from all sides. It felt as though the entire forest had paused, waiting for her to decide, to choose. But Amelia was not naive. She had learned over the course of her journey that power could be both a blessing and a curse. The Hallowed had been a perfect example of that, a force born from the imbalance of light and dark, a force that sought to consume everything in its path. And yet, in its wake, it had revealed something important to her, that darkness was not to be feared but understood, harnessed, controlled. But this was something else entirely. Corruption, the guardian had said. What kind of corruption? The figure seemed to sense her thoughts. It stepped closer, its shadow elongating across the glade, casting a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. As it moved, the forest seemed to respond. Trees groaned and shifted, the very earth beneath Amelia's feet trembling. The power of the figure was overwhelming, and for a moment, Amelia felt small beneath its presence. The forest itself seemed to bend toward the figure, as if it were the true master of this realm. "You wonder what corruption means?" the figure intoned, its voice smooth as silk yet carrying a weight that pressed on her chest. "The forest is not as pure as you think. There are ancient powers here that sleep beneath the earth, waiting to be awakened. The Hallowed was but a reflection of what lies below, a symptom of a much deeper unrest. There is power in the roots of this world, power that has been buried for centuries. And you, Amelia, have the ability to awaken it." Amelia's pulse quickened. The earth beneath her feet seemed to pulse with a deep, rhythmic energy, something alive, something old. She could feel it thrumming beneath the surface, like a heartbeat beneath the soil. It was as if the forest was alive in a way she had never truly understood before. The figure continued, its eyes glowing brighter now, reflecting the light of the hidden power below. "You have learned the ways of the Hallowed. You have tasted its dark power, felt it crawl beneath your skin. But you do not yet know what true power is, what lies beneath this forest. I offer you the choice to awaken that power, to claim it as your own." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The idea of such power, the power to command the very roots of the earth, to control the forces of nature, was intoxicating. She could feel the pull of it, a force as ancient and deep as the forest itself. The temptation was strong. It whispered to her, promising strength, influence, the ability to reshape the world in her image. But she knew the cost. The keeper's voice, soft yet steady, echoed in her mind, grounding her. "You are a guardian now, not a conqueror. The forest does not seek domination, it seeks balance. What you seek is not control but understanding. There is no strength in tyranny." Amelia closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the keeper's words sink into her soul. She had already seen the consequences of imbalance. The Hallowed had been born from the desire to control, to dominate. It had consumed everything in its path, leaving nothing but death and decay. The power the figure offered her was no different. It was a force that would bend the world to her will, but at what cost? It would corrupt her, change her, just as it had changed the land. It would swallow her until there was nothing left but power, empty, hollow power. But there was another path, a path of healing, a path of balance. She opened her eyes again, meeting the glowing gaze of the figure. Its expression had shifted slightly, its eyes narrowing, sensing her resistance. There was a quiet frustration in its presence now, but it did not move. It waited. Amelia took a deep breath, stepping forward, away from the figure, toward the keeper. She could feel the earth shift beneath her feet as she moved, the pulse of the forest responding to her choice. The figure remained still, its gaze locked on her, but the air around her seemed to grow lighter. The forest seemed to breathe again. "I do not seek domination," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I seek understanding, balance, healing. The forest is not something to control, it is something to care for. I choose to walk the path of restoration, not corruption." The figure said nothing at first. For a moment all was still. Then, slowly, it stepped back, its presence withdrawing like the ebbing of a tide. The air lightened, the earth beneath her feet settling once more. The trees around her, which had groaned and shifted under the weight of the figure's power, seemed to settle back into their natural rhythm. "You have made your choice," the figure said, its voice now almost a whisper, a fading echo. "The path of restoration is not without its trials, Amelia, but you will walk it alone as all must. The forest will not fight for you." Amelia nodded, her heart steady. She knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more tests, but she was no longer afraid. She had faced the hollowed. She had faced the darkness within and without. And now, she was ready to face whatever the forest had in store for her. The figure's form began to fade, its shadow pulling back into the trees, disappearing like a dream at dawn. The forest seemed to breathe a deep sigh, its pulse steady once again as if it had been holding its breath. Amelia turned to face the keeper, who watched her with quiet approval. She was ready. The path of balance awaited her. The forest stretched out before Amelia like an endless sea of green, the trees rising up like ancient sentinels, their canopies swaying gently in the soft breeze. The air had returned to its familiar, earthy scent, rich with moss and damp earth, though there was something else now. A new energy hung in the atmosphere, a stillness like the moment before a storm. It wasn't threatening, but it was heavy with anticipation, as though the very land was waiting for Amelia to take the next step. The keeper stood beside her, silent as always, its presence a quiet hum beneath the sounds of the forest. The guardian had faded into the shadows, but its words still lingered in the air, like an echo that wouldn't fade. "The path of restoration is not without its trials. You will walk it alone. Alone." Amelia's heart fluttered at the thought. She had spent so long fighting alongside others, drawing strength from those around her. But now, the keeper had made it clear. This path, this new journey, would be hers to walk alone. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders, but she did not shrink from it. She had chosen this. She had chosen balance, understanding, and healing. But that did not mean it would be easy. She turned her eyes to the path ahead, where the forest seemed to open up. The trees parted just slightly, allowing a glimpse of what lay beyond, the heart of the forest, the place where the land's deepest secrets rested. It was not a place of light, nor was it entirely dark. It was a place of balance, where the forces of nature coiled together like two opposing rivers, each fighting for dominance but ultimately bound by the same earth. With a deep breath, Amelia stepped forward, the soft crunch of leaves beneath her feet the only sound in the vast, quiet space. The air around her seemed to hum, alive with the pulse of the land, and the trees, though still and silent, felt almost watchful, as if they were aware of her every movement. Her connection with them had grown stronger over time, and now she could feel the pull of the roots beneath her, an ancient bond that tied her to the very earth itself. She was more than just a visitor here now. She was part of it, part of the land. The path twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the heart of the forest, where the canopy above thickened, casting deep shadows on the ground. There were no birds singing here, no rustling leaves or gentle breezes. It was quiet in a way that was both peaceful and unsettling. The only sound was the rhythmic thrum of her own heart, beating in time with the pulse of the earth beneath her. And then she saw it. A clearing appeared in front of her, bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. At its center stood an ancient tree, its trunk impossibly wide, gnarled and twisted with age. Its roots stretched out like a vast network, snaking through the earth, disappearing into the shadows beneath the soil. This tree, this was the heart of the forest. It was not the tallest tree nor the most beautiful, but it was the oldest. Its bark was dark and cracked, and the scars of countless storms marred its surface. But there was something powerful about it, something alive, that pulsed with an energy that matched the earth's own heartbeat. Amelia approached cautiously, her steps measured, as if drawn to it by an invisible force. The tree stood alone in the center of the clearing, but its presence was enough to fill the space. It was not just a tree. It was the embodiment of the forest itself, its roots, its history, its essence. As she neared, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift. The earth hummed with a quiet, almost imperceptible energy, and for a moment, Amelia felt a strange sensation, a pulling, a sinking feeling, as though the roots of the tree were reaching up, beckoning her to join with them. Her breath caught in her throat as she knelt beside the tree, placing her hand on its rough bark. The connection was instant, like a jolt of electricity that ran through her arm, up her spine, and deep into her soul. The energy of the tree surged through her, filling her with warmth and power, and yet there was something else, something dark, lurking in the depths. She could feel it, a shadow beneath the surface of the earth, coiled and waiting. It was not the hollowed. No, this was something older, something deeper. A force that had always been here, beneath the roots, beneath the soil. It was the very essence of the forest, the balance between light and dark, life and death. The tree's energy pulsed again, and suddenly the ground trembled beneath her feet. The roots beneath her hands seemed to shift, as if the tree were alive, breathing, moving. The earth groaned with the weight of centuries of untold power, and Amelia could feel it. Feel the ancient force that lay beneath the surface, just waiting to be awakened. She drew her hand back sharply, her heart racing in her chest. The tree's energy withdrew, retreating back into the earth, but the sensation lingered. The forest was alive, yes, but it was also aware. It knew she was here. It had been waiting for her. And then, as if on cue, a soft voice echoed in her mind, the voice of the keeper. The forest speaks to you, Amelia. It is alive, yes, but it is not without its dangers. The roots of this place run deep, and with them come forces that even the forest itself cannot control. But you must learn to understand them, to walk alongside them, not against them. This is your true test. Amelia's breath steadied as the voice faded, leaving her with a profound silence. The weight of the keeper's words settled in her chest, and she turned her gaze back to the tree. It was still, silent, but she could feel its pulse beneath her fingertips. She could feel the depth of its power, the depth of the forest's ancient roots. The path ahead would not be simple. The forest was not just a place of healing, it was a place of balance, and that balance was fragile. She had seen the cost of imbalance. The hollowed had been a force that sought to tip the scales, to take control of the land and drown it in darkness. But now the true challenge was before her. The forest was both light and dark, life and death. She could no longer view it as something to be saved or destroyed. She had to understand it, to walk its delicate line. Her hand hovered over the tree's roots again, and this time she did not pull away. Instead, she pressed her palm against the gnarled surface of the ancient trunk, feeling the pulse of the earth surge through her once more. She could sense the energy beneath the soil, the power that lay hidden, waiting to be tapped. She could feel the danger that came with it. But she was not afraid. She had faced the hollowed. She had faced her own fears. She was ready. The roots beneath her feet shifted again, this time with more purpose, as though the tree recognized her presence, recognized that she was ready to walk the path of balance. The earth rumbled softly, the ground shifting beneath her, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire forest had exhaled, releasing the tension that had built up over the years. The tree, the forest, had accepted her as part of its rhythm. But the real work had only just begun. Amelia stood tall, taking in a deep breath as she slowly removed her hand from the tree. The forest around her was still, but she could feel its energy, its heartbeat, deep in her chest. The balance between light and dark was delicate, and now, it was her responsibility to protect it. The forces beneath the earth were stirring, and she had been chosen to guide them. The path of restoration was not just a journey to heal the land, it was a journey to understand the forces that had shaped it, and to learn how to walk the line between them. She turned back toward the path, the energy of the forest still thrumming in her veins. The keeper's words echoed in her mind once more. You are part of the forest now, Amelia. The path ahead will test you, but you will not face it alone. The land is with you as you are with it. With those words in her heart, she began to walk, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as part of the forest, and the forest in turn would face them with her. The land's heartbeat was hers now, and it was stronger than ever. The path was long, but it was hers to walk. And she would walk it with strength, with balance, and with the knowledge that the forest was not just a place, it was a part of her. And she, a part of it. The forest stretched out in every direction, a living, breathing expanse of trees and moss, their tangled roots burrowing deep into the soil as if the land itself was holding its breath. The air was thick with moisture, the rain that had fallen earlier in the day now a distant memory, replaced by a calm, unshakable stillness that clung to the trees like the fading mist. The ethereal glow that had suffused the clearing, the heart of the forest, had faded, but the pulse of the land, the thrum beneath the surface, still vibrated in Amelia's bones, steady and insistent. She walked onward, her steps slow and deliberate, the earth soft beneath her feet. Every now and then she would stop, as if guided by some invisible force, to place her hand against the bark of a tree, to feel the faint pulse of life that flowed through it. The forest felt alive in a way that was more than just the rustling of leaves or the whispering of the wind. It was a living, breathing entity, its roots tangled together like veins, its branches reaching out like arms, and its energy wrapped around her like a cloak. Amelia's mind was still filled with the keeper's words, the last part of their conversation echoing in her thoughts. The path of restoration is not without its trials. The forest is alive, yes, but it is not without its dangers. The roots run deep, and so too do the forces that stir within the earth. You must walk alongside them, not against them. The truth of those words settled in her chest, heavy and unrelenting. She had chosen the path of balance, but that balance was fragile. The darkness that had once been the hollowed had not been eradicated. It still lingered, far beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when the land would falter. The forces she had touched, the energies of the roots beneath her, were not merely forces of life. They were forces of everything, creation and destruction, birth and decay. And yet Amelia felt no fear. She had seen the hollowed, had faced its wrath, and in doing so she had learned something about herself and about the forest. She had learned that darkness was not to be feared, nor was it something to be destroyed. It was something to be understood, to be woven into the greater fabric of the world. It was a part of the cycle. The hollowed had been born of imbalance, of a desire to control, to bend the world to its will. But in the end, it had been the forest itself, the land, that had restored order. It was the land that had stood firm against the tides of chaos. And now it was the land that called to her. She reached the edge of the clearing, where the trees grew even older, their trunks twisted and gnarled with age. The forest here was thicker, darker, the shadows deeper, and the air cooler. The pulse beneath her feet had changed, becoming more erratic, more uncertain. It was as though the land itself was restless, like something ancient, something forgotten, was waking from a long, deep sleep. There was a sound now, faint at first, barely audible over the whispering wind. It was a low hum, like the reverberation of a voice that had been buried beneath the soil for centuries. Amelia stopped, listening. The sound seemed to come from the earth itself, rising up from the roots beneath her feet. It was a voice, but not in any language she recognized. The words were distorted, twisted by time, but there was power in them, power that made her skin tingle and her pulse race. Amelia felt a compulsion to move forward, to follow the sound, as if it were pulling her deeper into the forest. She had no idea what she was seeking, but she knew she was not the first to walk this path. The land was old, older than even the keeper. It had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the passing of countless seasons, the ebb and flow of life and death. And now it was calling her. The question was, why? As she walked, the trees grew denser, the canopy thicker, until the sunlight could barely penetrate through the leaves. The air here was colder, damp with the moisture of centuries. The earth beneath her feet had a slick, almost slippery quality, as though the soil itself was older than she could comprehend. Her breath came in slow, measured exhales as she made her way deeper into the shadows. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath her feet. A low rumble, like the growl of some ancient beast, echoed from the depths of the earth. The hum, the voice, grew louder, more insistent. The trees around her seemed to bend toward her, their branches stretching, their roots twisting beneath the soil. The forest was not just alive, it was awakening, and in its awakening, something was stirring. Something ancient. Amelia's heart quickened. She could feel it now, feel the presence of something older than the forest itself. It was not evil, not in the way the hollowed had been, but it was something primal, something that held the memory of the earth's first heartbeat, its first breath. It was a force that had shaped the land, that had shaped everything in this world. The voice grew louder, and now she could make out words, fragments of forgotten languages, long since lost to time. It was calling to her, urging her to listen, to understand. It spoke of the beginning of all things, The birth of the forest, the rise of the ancient trees, the first roots that had stretched down into the earth, binding the world together. It spoke of the cycles of life and death, of balance and imbalance. It was a voice older than the hallowed, older than the keeper, older than time itself. She stepped into a large, hollowed space in the earth, the ground opening up before her like the mouth of some great beast. The trees around her seemed to recede, creating an open space, a clearing of sorts, but one that felt like an altar, a place of power. In the center of this hollow there was a stone, an ancient, weathered monolith, standing tall and proud amidst the shadows. The stone was carved with symbols, intricate and mysterious, swirling patterns that seemed to move and shift as she gazed upon them. The stone seemed to hum with the same energy that had pulsed through the earth, through the roots, through the very fabric of the forest. She stepped closer to the stone, feeling the hum beneath her skin. It was no longer just a sound, it was a feeling, a vibration that resonated deep within her chest. It was the heartbeat of the earth, the pulse of the forest, the beginning of all things. And then, in the quiet, in the stillness of the forest, Amelia heard it clearly. A voice, ancient and deep, not in her mind, but in the very air around her. "You have come." The words were not a question. They were a declaration. The voice, though not human, was as familiar as her own thoughts. It was the voice of the forest, the voice of the land itself. "You are a part of us now. You have touched the roots, and the roots have touched you. You will walk the path of balance, but know this: there is more to the forest than you understand, more than what you have seen." The hollowed was but a glimpse of the darkness beneath, and now you must choose once more. Will you restore the balance, or will you awaken that which has been sleeping for so long? The voice paused, and for a moment, Amelia's heart stilled. The weight of the choice pressed down on her, a burden she had not expected. The forest was not simply a place to be healed. It was a place of creation and destruction. It was a place of life and death. The hollowed had been a disruption, yes, but the balance was not as simple as that. There was something deeper, something in the roots of the forest, something buried in the depths of the earth, that she had yet to understand. The voice spoke again, softer this time, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. "The choice is yours, Amelia. But know this, every choice has its price." Her breath caught in her throat. She could feel the pull of the earth beneath her, could feel the power of the forest rising up, beckoning her to make her decision. What would she choose? The path of restoration? Or something else entirely? The weight of the world pressed against her chest, and for the first time she wondered if she was truly ready to face the truth of the forest's heart. The land waited, the forest waited, and Amelia, standing at the edge of the abyss, had to decide. Amelia's pulse echoed in her ears, her breath shallow and uneven as she stood at the heart of the hollow, the ancient stone looming before her like a sentinel from another age. The voice of the forest still lingered in the air, reverberating with a deep, primal rhythm that made her feel both connected and overwhelmed by the immense weight of the world around her. She stepped closer to the stone, her feet sinking slightly into the damp earth as she moved, the pulse of the land thrumming beneath her. Each step felt like it was pulling her deeper into the very fabric of the forest, into its heart. The symbols carved into the stone seemed to glow faintly now, their intricate patterns shifting as if alive. It was as if the stone itself had been waiting for her to arrive, to stand before it, to hear the call of the forest and decide her fate. The voice had spoken, but it hadn't asked a simple question. It had demanded something far more complex. Will you restore the balance, or will you awaken that which has been sleeping for so long? Amelia had felt the weight of those words settle over her like a thick cloak. The balance she had come to understand was not a static thing. It was fluid, ever-changing, and she could feel that now deep in her bones. The hollowed had been the result of imbalance, a force that had sought to tip the scales. But this was something else entirely. The forest, the land beneath her feet, was not just a place of light and dark. It was a living, breathing entity, a force that had existed long before humanity, long before the first fire had ever been lit. And now it was speaking to her, asking her to choose. Her fingers brushed against the surface of the stone, the cold, rough texture sending a shiver up her spine. She could feel the energy within it, ancient and raw, like a current running through the veins of the earth. It was not just power, it was knowledge, deep, forgotten knowledge that the land held within its roots. Amelia closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She had always been a protector of the land, a guardian of balance. She had fought against the darkness of the hollowed, had felt its insidious pull as it sought to consume the world. But the forest was not the hollowed. It was not simply a force to be fought, it was a part of the world, as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. The voice had said, "You are a part of us now." And it was true. The moment she had touched the roots, the moment she had placed her hands upon the ancient bark of the trees, she had become entwined with the forest in ways she hadn't fully understood. It was not just the forest that was alive, it was her too. She could feel its rhythms in her veins, its pulse in her chest. But the question still loomed. Would she walk the path of restoration, or would she awaken something buried beneath the earth, something ancient and powerful but dangerous? The forest was calling to her. The power beneath the soil was calling to her. And Amelia felt it, a deep, stirring temptation. It was not a darkness, not in the way of the hallowed. It was a force of creation, of rebirth, of primordial power. It was the force that had shaped the land, that had given rise to the trees, to the roots, to the very foundation of the world itself. But that power came with a cost. She could feel it deep within her. The moment she chose, the path would be set. If she chose to awaken the ancient force beneath the soil, she would bring forth something that had been lying dormant for centuries. A force that had shaped the forest in its earliest days, but a force that had also been the source of countless battles, of chaos and destruction. It was the very power that had forged the first trees, but it was also the power that had torn apart civilizations in the past, leaving nothing but ruin and ash in its wake. The keeper's words echoed in her mind, a whisper from the past. The forest speaks to you. It is alive, yes, but it is not without its dangers. The roots run deep, and so too do the forces that stir within the earth. You must walk alongside them, not against them. Could she walk alongside this power? Could she truly control it, understand it, and use it for good? Or would she, like so many before her, be consumed by it, lost in the depths of the ancient earth? The choice was not easy. It was not a simple decision between light and dark. It was a decision between control and understanding, between creating a new world and preserving the old one. The balance of the forest, of the world itself, was fragile, and one wrong step could unravel everything. Amelia's fingers tightened around the stone, her eyes opening as the words of the voice continued to echo in her mind. Every choice has its price. She could feel the weight of that price now, heavier than anything she had ever carried. The path of restoration would not be easy. It would require sacrifice, patience, and a deep understanding of the land's rhythms. But it was the path she had chosen, one of balance, one of healing. It would require her to walk alongside the darkness, not fight it, to understand the forces that shape the world and restore harmony. But the ancient power beneath the earth, the force that had shaped the forest's very foundations, offered something different. It offered the chance to become something greater, to reshape the land, to bend it to her will. It offered the promise of power unlike anything she had ever known. And yet, she felt the pull of the earth beneath her feet. It was a reminder that the forest was not just something to be controlled. It was something to be respected. The land had its own heartbeat, its own rhythms, and those rhythms had existed long before her. They would continue long after she was gone. She stepped back from the stone, her mind racing as the weight of her decision grew heavier. The voice, the ancient force beneath the earth, had spoken again, but now she could hear something else. Something softer. It was the keeper. "You are not alone, Amelia. The forest is with you as you are with it. Your path is yours to walk, but you do not walk it alone. The land has its own way of guiding those who are willing to listen." Amelia closed her eyes, the warmth of the keeper's words wrapping around her like a shield. The keeper had always been there, a quiet presence at her side, guiding her without imposing, teaching her without demanding. And now, in this moment, as she stood on the precipice of the greatest decision she would ever make, it was the keeper's wisdom she turned to. "The path of restoration may be long and difficult," the keeper's voice whispered in her mind, "but it is a path of life, and it is a path that can heal the land. It is the path of understanding. Walk with the land. Listen to it. Walk alongside the forces that shape it, not against them." Amelia breathed deeply, the weight of the decision settling into her bones. She had already learned so much from the forest, from the keeper, from the trees, from the earth beneath her. The forest was not a thing to be controlled, nor was it a force to be feared. It was a force of life, of balance, and of understanding. The power that the forest offered her, both the ancient force beneath the soil and the path of restoration, was not about control. It was about understanding. It was about listening. And as the wind rustled through the trees, as the earth beneath her feet pulsed with life, Amelia knew what she had to do. With a final, steadying breath, she turned away from the stone and the temptation that lay beneath it. She walked back to the path, her feet firm upon the earth, her heart steady with resolve. She had made her choice. The path of restoration was long and fraught with challenges. But she was not alone. The forest was with her, and she would walk alongside it every step of the way. The land waited, and she was ready to listen. Amelia's feet moved with purpose now, the earth beneath her soft and yielding but unwavering. Her heart had found its rhythm, steady and strong, echoing the pulse of the forest beneath her feet. She had made her choice, and now she could feel the land, the forest, responding to her. It was a subtle shift, like the air clearing after a storm, or the quiet before the first light of dawn. The path ahead was not just a road through the trees, it was a path through time, through the deep, ancient roots of the earth itself. The forest was no longer a place of fear. It was no longer a battleground, where forces of light and dark clashed in an eternal struggle. It was a living, breathing entity, and Amelia had become a part of it. But she understood now that the forest was not simply a force of nature. It was a reflection of all that was. Life and death, creation and destruction. And it was her responsibility to guide it, to maintain the delicate balance between those forces. The deeper she walked into the forest, the more she felt the weight of the land's ancient power. The trees around her seemed taller now, their trunks gnarled with age, their branches reaching toward the sky like outstretched arms. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, rich and fertile, and the sound of distant birdsong filled the silence like a lullaby. But beneath the calm, beneath the serenity, there was a hum, a quiet pulse that seemed to echo from the very heart of the earth. It was the rhythm of the land, the song of the forest. And now it was Amelia's song too. She paused for a moment, closing her eyes and letting the sounds of the forest wash over her. The breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the scent of something ancient, something old like the memory of a time long past. The roots of the trees twisted beneath her feet, stretching out like veins beneath the surface of the earth, pulsing with life. She could feel them deep inside her, as if the land itself were calling to her. "You are one of us," it seemed to say. "The forest is no longer something you merely protect. It is something you are a part of." Her fingers brushed against the bark of a nearby tree, and for a moment she felt the world around her shift. The tree's surface was rough beneath her touch, but there was warmth there, an energy that flowed through her as if the tree was sharing something with her, something older than words, deeper than thought. It was not a feeling of power, but of connection. The forest was speaking to her, yes, but it was not just in whispers or echoes. It was in the silence between the sounds, in the breath of the earth, in the pulse of the roots beneath her feet. Amelia stood still for a moment, letting the feeling settle into her bones. There was no longer a divide between the land and herself. She was a part of it just as much as the trees, the birds, and the very soil beneath her. But the question remained, what would she do with this power? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden rustling from behind her. She turned, her senses heightened. The forest around her seemed to shift, the trees growing denser, the air cooler. There, in the distance, through a veil of mist, something moved. A shadow, a figure, was emerging from the trees. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. At first, it seemed like another person, another traveler lost in the woods. But as the figure came closer, she realized something different. This was no ordinary traveler. The figure was tall, cloaked in the shadows of the trees, its face obscured by the hood of its cloak. It moved with a fluid grace, its steps silent on the forest floor. The forest seemed to bend around it, as though the trees themselves were bowing in its presence. Amelia's instincts flared. Her hand went to the hilt of her knife, the blade comforting in her palm, but she did not draw it. There was something about the figure that did not feel threatening, though her heart still raced in her chest. This was not an enemy, but who or what it was she could not yet tell. As the figure stepped into the clearing, it paused, its presence hanging in the air like a storm cloud on the horizon. Amelia took a step forward, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make out the details of the figure. The forest had gone quiet again, as though holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The figure raised its head, revealing its face, pale and gaunt, with sharp features that seemed carved from the very stone of the earth. Its eyes were dark, hollow pits, but they held a strange kind of knowledge, an ancient wisdom that seemed to shimmer in the depths of their shadows. The figure's lips parted, and a voice, deep and resonant, filled the space between them. "You have made your choice," it said, its voice a low, rumbling echo that seemed to resonate with the very earth beneath Amelia's feet. "The balance you seek to restore, it will not be easy." Amelia stood tall, her resolve firm. She did not know who this figure was, but it was not the first time she had faced an unknown entity in these woods. She could feel the power of the forest within her, coursing through her veins, steadying her. "I know the risks," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced with the gravity of the moment. "But it is a path I must walk. The forest is more than just a place. It is a part of the world, and I will restore what has been lost. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You speak of balance, it mused, almost to itself. But balance is not a thing that can be easily restored. It is a force that must be tempered, nurtured, and protected. The roots that hold this world together are deeper than you realize, and there are forces at work that you do not yet understand. They will test you just as they have tested those before you. Amelia's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on the hilt of her knife. I am ready for whatever comes. I won't let the forest fall to the same fate it once faced. The figure's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Perhaps you are more ready than you know. It paused, allowing the silence to stretch between them like a taut wire. But know this, Amelia, the forest is alive, but it is not just life you protect. You will face not only the darkness of the past but the shadow of the future. The balance you seek to restore is fragile, and it is constantly threatened by the forces that lurk beneath the surface. There are those who will wish to use the land's power for their own ends. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected as much. The Hallowed had been the most recent manifestation of those who sought to control the forest's power, to bend it to their will. But there would be others, and they would not give up easily. The figure stepped closer, its dark eyes watching her with a gaze that seemed to pierce through her. I am not here to warn you of the dangers ahead, Amelia. I am here to offer you guidance should you need it. It extended its hand, not in friendship, but as an offering, an unspoken pact. The forest is a living thing, but it is not without its shadows. The path ahead will test you, challenge you in ways you cannot yet foresee. And there will come a time when you must choose again, whether to walk alongside the darkness or push it back into the earth from whence it came. Amelia felt the weight of the figure's words. The path of restoration was not just a journey of healing, it was a journey of battle, of understanding, and of facing the very shadows of the earth itself. She had chosen to walk with the forest to restore the balance, but the shadow of the past, and the shadow of the future, would not let her walk it unchallenged. With a deep breath, Amelia nodded. She knew now that the forest would test her, but she was no stranger to tests. The Hallowed had not broken her, and neither would whatever dark forces lay ahead. I will walk the path, she said firmly, and I will protect the balance, no matter the cost. The figure's gaze softened, a hint of something almost like approval flickering in its eyes. It withdrew its hand, and with a final lingering glance, it turned and melted into the shadows of the forest, disappearing without a sound. Amelia stood still for a moment, letting the forest's pulse resonate through her. She was alone again, but not truly alone. The forest, the keeper, and the land itself were with her. She could feel them, beneath her feet, in her veins, in the very air she breathed. The path ahead was uncertain, the trials she would face unknown. But the forest had chosen her, and she had chosen it in return. And now, it was time to face whatever shadows lay hidden beneath the earth. The forest stretched out in all directions, a labyrinth of trees that whispered secrets older than time. Amelia stood at the edge of the clearing, her mind swirling with the figure's words. The encounter had been brief, but its weight hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. The shadows the figure had spoken of were not just figments of darkness. They were real, tangible forces, lurking beneath the earth, waiting to emerge. Amelia's resolve had not faltered, but the road ahead had become murkier. The path of restoration she had chosen was not just about healing, it was about balance, and balance was not a state of peace. It was a delicate dance, a continuous battle between forces that, at their core, were in constant conflict. The forest itself seemed to shift around her. The trees whispered in the wind, the rustling leaves carrying with them an undertone of something ancient, something restless. The earth beneath her feet hummed softly, as if attuned to her every thought. The land was alive, and it was speaking to her, though not in words. No, the forest had its own language, one that could only be felt, not heard. The figure had mentioned the shadow of the future, and Amelia couldn't help but wonder what that meant. The Hallowed had been a dark force, yes, but it had been born from an imbalance that had been corrected. She had restored order, but the battle had only revealed the tip of an iceberg. There was more to the forest's mysteries than she had realized, and that ancient voice, deep in the roots of the earth, had hinted at forces that were not simply of the past, but of the future. A future where the shadows she had banished might return, more powerful than before. The winds picked up, swirling around her like a quiet storm, tugging at the hem of her cloak. Amelia turned, her senses sharpened, and for the first time she felt something more, an eerie stillness that settled deep in her chest. It was as though the forest had paused, waiting for something to happen. And then, as if to answer her unspoken question, the ground beneath her feet trembled. It was a subtle shift, the earth vibrating softly, but it was enough to send a chill crawling up her spine. Without warning, the air around her grew colder. The trees began to sway, their branches creaking and groaning, as if they were reacting to some unseen force. The sky above darkened, the clouds rolling in thick and fast, blocking out the sun. The forest, usually so full of life and light, seemed to close in on itself, the very atmosphere shifting in a way that felt wrong. Amelia's breath quickened. She could feel it now. The pulse of the forest had changed. It was no longer in harmony. There was a dissonance, a clash between forces that should not have been in opposition. The earth beneath her feet seemed to be pulling her toward something, an invisible force drawing her deeper into the woods. She gripped the hilt of her knife, the cold steel offering her a semblance of comfort, though she knew it would not be enough if whatever this was truly meant to harm her. With each passing second, the tension in the air thickened, pressing down on her chest. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to act. Then she saw it. A flicker of movement, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable. It was not an animal, nor a person, though it seemed to have the shape of one. A shadow, darker than the deepest night, slithered through the trees, creeping toward her with unnatural speed. It was as if the very darkness of the forest had taken form, a living thing that could bend the shadows to its will. Amelia's heart raced. She had felt it before, this presence. It was the same darkness that had once been the Hollowed, the same insidious force that had nearly consumed the forest. But this was different. It was not a physical being. It was a presence, an energy that radiated from the earth itself, from the roots beneath her feet. It was something old, something deep, and it was rising once again. The shadow moved swiftly, circling her, always just out of reach, as though it were testing her, waiting for her to make a move. Amelia stood still, her senses stretched to their limit, watching the shifting dark with a mixture of awe and dread. She had fought the Hollowed, but this felt more like an infection, a corruption that was spreading through the roots of the forest, feeding on the very essence of the land. For the first time, Amelia understood what the figure had meant when it spoke of the shadow of the future. The forest was not simply being threatened by forces of the past, it was being undone by forces that sought to unravel everything it had ever been. The shadow twisted, coiling around the trees, slithering like smoke through the air. Amelia could feel its presence pressing against her, drawing closer with each passing second. It was not malevolent in the way the Hollowed had been. It was more insidious, more patient, as though it were biding its time, waiting for her to fall. And then, in a sudden burst of motion, the shadow lunged. It wasn't a tangible strike, but a wave, a rush of darkness that seemed to fill the space around her, drowning her in its cold, suffocating embrace. Amelia's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she thought she might lose herself in it, become just another part of the forest's endless web of shadows. But then she remembered the keeper's words, "The forest speaks to you. It is alive, yes, but it is not without its dangers. The roots run deep, and so too do the forces that stir within the earth. You must walk alongside them, not against them." She had chosen to walk alongside the forest, not against it. And now, the forest was asking her to do the same with the shadows that sought to consume it. Amelia's grip tightened on her knife, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of her choice. The forest had chosen her to be its guardian, and she would not let it fall to the same fate again. She would stand with the land, with the roots that tied her to this place, and she would face this darkness head-on. The shadow swirled around her, faster now, but Amelia did not flinch. She closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her feet, feeling the forest's heartbeat in her chest. She focused on the rhythm, the way the earth's energy flowed, steady and constant, despite the forces that sought to disrupt it. With a deep, steadying breath, Amelia extended her hands, palms open, toward the shadow. She called out to the forest, not with words but with intention. She could feel the land stirring, the roots shifting beneath her feet, responding to her call. The shadow hesitated as if it felt the pull of the earth itself. The darkness rippled, its edges flickering and fading, unable to maintain its form as the land's energy began to push against it. For a moment, the two forces clashed, the shadow's insidious presence pressing against the forest's strength. But then the balance shifted. The forest's pulse grew stronger, its roots reaching deeper into the earth, grounding itself in the face of the darkness. The shadow, once so powerful, began to dissolve, retreating back into the depths of the soil from which it had come. Amelia stood firm, her breath steadying as the last of the darkness faded into the earth. The forest around her seemed to exhale, the tension that had been so thick in the air dissipating like mist in the wind. The trees creaked softly, their branches shifting as if in acknowledgement of the battle fought and won. But as the forest began to return to its quiet, steady rhythm, Amelia felt the weight of what had just transpired. The battle was not over. The shadow that had risen was but a fragment of something far larger, something that was still stirring beneath the surface. The forest had spoken, yes, but it had also warned her. There were darker forces yet to come. The road ahead would not be simple. It would be fraught with challenges, with tests she could not yet foresee. But Amelia was ready. The forest had chosen her, and she would walk the path of balance no matter the cost. The forest had fallen into a quiet that was almost unnerving. The battle between the shadow and the land had left its mark, not in visible destruction, but in the subtle shift of the air, in the way the trees stood a little taller, their roots a little deeper, as though the forest itself had braced against something far older and more powerful than even the hallowed. But Amelia knew that this was not over. What had just transpired was only a glimpse of the struggle that lay ahead. The land had responded to her, yes, but it had also sent her a warning. The shadow that had manifested was not a single force. It was a thread in a larger web, one that was woven deep into the roots of the earth itself. There were powers at play here, forces that had existed long before her, and they would not be easily defeated. Amelia could feel them in the earth beneath her feet, in the whisper of the wind through the leaves, in the silent gaze of the trees that surrounded her. They were watching her, waiting for her to make the next move. As the air began to clear, Amelia stepped forward, her feet crunching lightly on the damp forest floor. The weight of the moment was heavy on her shoulders, but she refused to let it cripple her. The forest had chosen her for a reason. She was not just a protector. She was a weaver, a guardian who could bend the threads of life and death, light and dark, into something new, something balanced. But she was not alone. The keeper had guided her, the forest had spoken to her, and now she was beginning to understand the deeper truths of this place. The shadow may have been pushed back for now, but Amelia knew it would not stay away. It would return, perhaps in a different form, perhaps in a way she could not yet understand. The forest was full of these layers, these hidden forces, and it was her responsibility to untangle them, to understand the intricate dance of life and death that had shaped the land for centuries. The keeper had warned her, and the forest had shown her. There were forces within the earth that did not always adhere to the rules of time or space. The ancient ones, the first weavers of the forest, the ones who had crafted the roots and the branches, had left their mark on this world. Their legacy was in the land itself, in the very air she breathed. As she continued deeper into the woods, the path seemed to open up before her. The trees here were older, their bark thick with age, their roots spreading far and wide beneath the soil. The air was still, almost expectant, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for her to make the next move. In the distance, a faint glow shimmered through the trees. It was not the familiar, comforting light of the sun or the stars, but something else, something unnatural but not entirely foreign. Amelia felt her pulse quicken as she moved toward it. The glow was faint at first, like the dying embers of a fire, but as she drew closer, it grew brighter, more distinct. It was a soft, ethereal light that seemed to shimmer and pulse with a rhythm of its own, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. The path wound around a group of ancient oak trees, their massive trunks twisted in strange, unnatural patterns. It was here, among the roots of the oaks, that the light seemed to converge, pooling in the center of the clearing. Amelia stepped closer, her breath steady, but her senses on high alert. There was something about this place, about this light, that unsettled her. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something haunting about it, something that felt wrong. As she stepped into the clearing, the air around her grew colder. The glow seemed to pulse more intensely now, as if it were alive, feeding on the very essence of the forest. The trees around her bent toward it, their branches creaking under the weight of an unseen force. And then she saw it. A figure standing in the center of the glowing pool of light. It was cloaked in shadow, its form shifting and undulating like smoke. The figure was tall, its features hidden beneath a hood, but Amelia could feel its gaze on her, sharp and piercing. There was a weight to its presence, something ancient and powerful that filled the clearing with an undeniable sense of dread. The figure spoke, its voice not a sound but a feeling, a wave that reverberated through the very air around them. "You have come far, Amelia," it said, the words swirling around her like the wind through the trees. "But do you truly understand what you are facing?" Amelia's heart skipped a beat, but she stood her ground. "I am here to restore the balance," she replied, her voice steady despite the chill that was creeping into her bones. I know that the path ahead is difficult, but I will not falter. The figure shifted, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. Balance? It asked, its voice dripping with an unsettling mix of amusement and disdain. Balance is a fleeting thing, girl. It is a thread that stretches thin and snaps under the weight of time. You speak of restoration, but you have not even begun to understand the cost of what you seek. Amelia's hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of her knife, but she did not draw it. She knew that violence was not the answer here. The shadow, the figure, it was part of the forest, part of the fabric of this world. She had learned that much already. Then help me understand, she said, her voice steady, unwavering. Help me understand what I must face. The figure's laugh, low and hollow, echoed through the trees. I do not help, it said. I guide. And you, Amelia, have already begun to walk a path that cannot be unwalked. There are forces at play here, forces older than you can fathom. You seek balance, but balance is a fragile thing, always on the brink of collapse. You think the shadow is your enemy, but you do not understand its purpose. Amelia stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she met the figure's gaze. Then tell me, she demanded, what is its purpose? The figure tilted its head, its hood shifting to reveal only the faintest glimmer of light beneath. It smiled, though the smile was more of a grimace, a thing that twisted the air around them. The shadow is the root of all things, child. It is the force that binds creation and destruction together. It is not an enemy, it is the truth of the world. The balance you seek to restore is not a simple thing. It is a game of light and dark, of birth and death. You cannot choose one without the other. And those who try, those who think they can tip the scales in their favor, will always fail. Amelia stood still, absorbing the weight of the figure's words. She had faced darkness before, had fought the hollowed, had seen the forces that sought to destroy the balance. But this was different. The figure was not speaking of simple good and evil. It was speaking of something far deeper, something that transcended all that she had known. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice soft but firm. I want nothing from you, the figure replied, its voice like a whisper carried on the wind. But I will show you something. The path you walk is not just a choice between light and dark. It is a path that leads through the roots of all things, through time, through the land, through the very fabric of existence. And in the end, you will be forced to choose between becoming the weaver of the world or becoming its destroyer. The figure stepped back, and as it did, the light that had surrounded it began to fade, leaving only the faintest glow in the distance. Choose wisely, Amelia. The forest will speak to you again. And when it does, you will know the truth of your path. And with that, the figure disappeared into the shadows, leaving Amelia standing alone in the clearing, the silence of the forest pressing down on her. The forest waited. The shadows shifted. And Amelia, standing at the crossroads of light and dark, was left to decide whether to become the weaver or to let the world unravel.